and my business is responsible not to take role.
Select Committee on Capital Financing and Investments, May 12th meeting, Senator Driscoll.
Here.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Here.
Senator Kinski.
Here.
Senator Nethercott. Senator Perkins.
Excused. Senator Nethercott's excused.
Representative Hallinan.
Here.
Representative Harshman.
Here.
Representative Larson. Representative Nicholas. Representative Obermuller.
Here.
Representative Schwartz.
Here.
All right. We're welcome to Capital Finance and Investments. We're happy to be here on this first meeting of the year. We've got a lot to do this interim and to get started on this interim. So with that, let's I don't have an agenda in here. Right in the front. I already passed it. Oh, there we go. All right, next, first item we have is selection of chairman and vice chairman.
Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Acting Chairman,
Mr. Acting Chairman, Senator Representative
I'd
Harshman.
like to, members of the committee, I'd motion that Senator Perkins be the chairman.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Other nominations, please, other nomination. All right, we'll close off nominations. You got everybody understand the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries. All right, nominations are open for vice chairman.
I move with Representative Nicholas for vice chair.
Second.
Got a motion and a motion by Senator Hicks and a second by Representative Harshman. Other nominations. There appearing to be none, although everybody's aware of the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. What are you guys thinking? Anyway, motion carries. Congratulations, Vice Chairman. So next slide we've got is adoption of interim committee rules.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Representative
I
Harshman.
just move the adoption of our standard rules that we've always operated under this committee.
Takes a straight up majority on this committee. Discussion. My opinion on this is that this committee is comprised of equal numbers from each house. So I don't know that we need, so I think those rules work, but any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Motion carries. Rules are adopted. We're stuck. So let's go. So far we're doing good. We're just a couple minutes ahead of time. So let's go to who's going to do this for us? Is it Brian? Brian, welcome back. It's good to see you. How's fatherhood treating you? Well, this is the second time. We got two now. So anyway, congratulations. Good to see you. And thanks for all your hard work from home in the middle of your family leave. Ian, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Quickly, the first agenda item is simply kind of an introduction, some background to this interim's work. I'm going to first give you sort of a rundown on this interim studies topics and what we've been approved by Management Council to do. And then Polly will briefly discuss a memo that she provided that gives some additional background information. I think as the committee is aware, we have I guess I'd like to introduce our staff. I think most people know everyone, but Brian Fuller will be helping staff the committee this year with Polly, who is a senior fiscal analyst, and Karen Vaughn, who is one of the LEs from the fiscal division as well. So we'll be working together. I think we're going to have a busy interim, and so we're staffed a little more than we have in other interims. As you know, the Management Council adopted 3 interim topics for the committee this year. One was a comprehensive study of investment permanent and non-permanent funds pursuant to Senate File 121. The committee has to provide oversight of a study by the Investment Funds Committee on the state's investment management structure. And then we have our statutory duties. And I want to explain that a little bit and make some additional comments on those. First one is pursuant to Senate File 121. This committee has to perform a comprehensive study of the inviolate nature and appropriate allocation of permanent and non-permanent state funds and their investment earnings in light of constitutional law, federal law, state law, and applicable fiduciary duties. Brian's going to talk about this considerably more at the 1:30 time slot. So we'll get into the details of this study at that time and be able to discuss it. But there's a couple of important parts. I think that the committee need to recognize that this is either a 1 or 2 year study according to the legislation. It may, because it's fairly comprehensive and complex, the committee may want to consider dividing up the tasks and whether it would want to spread that study over to a 2 year period. I think because of the complex nature of the tasks, I think it's going to take some planning and coordination both between the committee and LSO and potentially the other players. The legislation contemplates coordination between the State Loan and Investment Board, State Treasurer's Office, and the IFC in completion of this study. So I think it will be significant and important work, obviously. The second topic is what came out of House Bill 244, which is this committee's obligation to oversee with an IFC report with support from the State Treasurer's Office and SLIB on the options for restructuring and improving the state's investment management structure. That report is going to require consideration of legal and fiduciary obligations of the state in investing its funds, efficiency, long-term returns, management structure, and staffing. Again, a rather comprehensive study that isn't the primary obligation of this committee to conduct, but we do need to oversee that. A couple of important points there is that this committee is charged with oversight and assisting in that study to the extent it's requested, as is LSO. The legislation makes clear that LSO can be asked to assist in that study with management council approval. The two studies in Senate File 121 and this one are different, but there are some overlapping topics. Particularly, I think the plain language indicates that some consideration of the fiduciary duties of the state and of the investment teams is important and some overlap, but there are also different. And I think the committee would be wise to consider the fact that there are two fairly large studies that will consume a lot of time. Finally, we have our standard statutory responsibilities. Those are some that we do every year, like monitoring the investment performance, risk assessment, and fees for fiscal year 21, spending policy, considering spending policy results for fiscal year 2021, looking at performance compensation from the State Treasurer's Office and the retirement system, and of course, monitoring our public purpose investments. A couple of new things this year, though, that also resulted from new legislation. Those include monitoring changes to the IFC's membership from House Bill 219. As you probably recall, Senate File 120 and 119 require the adoption of a reference profile for risk assessment. And that will be an interesting transition. I think that's something that they'll be talking about later on in this agenda as well. And then as well as a kind of continued monitoring of the State Treasurer's Office, improvements to their system in the front, middle, and back end of their office. Again, that's another topic for discussion today. I guess I could just say we look forward to working with the committee this year. I think it's going to be a busier one, maybe busier than normal, but we look forward to it. And Polly, I'll let you do your work.
Actually, before we do have Polly, does anybody have any questions for Ian? Okay, you got off on that one, Ian. Okay, go ahead, Polly. Glad to have you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And let me share my screen.
Is the host not letting you in? There you go.
I
Now
think the host
there you-
finally let me in. Thank
Okay.
you. Okay. You have in your packet a memo dated April 27th, and it's from me, and it's background information primarily for the new committee members. And I'll walk through it very briefly. First of all, the select committee was created about 20 years ago, at the time when the state treasurer's office was investing beyond fixed income. And so the committee's been in place for about 20 years. The committee is charged with oversight of the state's investments and spending policies. The memo has a list there of the statutes that the committee primarily handles. And that's also an addendum in your memo. And then moving on to B of the memo, the select committee is required by statute to report to the full legislature each year on spending policy recommendations. And the 2020 report that this committee provided last year to the legislature conveyed support for some adjustments to the statutes about the timing of when payments are made from the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund reserve account to the general fund. And the select committee sponsored legislation about that in the last session, which passed. Maybe I should back up and just say a bit about what the spending policies are. The spending policy really is the term that we use to describe the amount that's going to be spent each year on the programs that are supported by the state's investments. And that's what the spending policies are. The select committee last year also started a dialogue with the state treasurer's office and the investment funds committee to talk about supporting improved investment outcomes for the future. And there was quite a bit of legislation that came from the last session as a result. And those are in your memo in section C. There's a hyperlink where you can go to those pieces of legislation. Senate File 63 was sponsored by the Select Committee in the February part of the session. And again, we worked on that in conjunction with the State Treasurer's Office, and it changed the timing of when the payments would be made from the reserve account to the general fund. Senate File 119 was sponsored by the JAC. This amended the law to replace having a specific percentage that would be in equities or designated as a cap on equities, replace that with a risk profile standard for the investments of permanent funds. Senate File 120 was the companion bill for that, which was for non-permanent funds. And I know that the people who've been on the committee before are very familiar with this, and that this is really for the newer members. And I know the State Treasurer's Office is going to talk about how they're moving forward with those pieces of legislation. Senate File 121, sponsored by Senator Perkins. This legislation did quite a few things. And they're kind of listed out there. Codified some of the current practices of the State Treasurer's Office related to the payout of gains and capital gains and losses. Also implemented a uniform term of earnings in various parts of the statutes. Modified the spending policy amounts for the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund, the Common School Permanent Land Fund, and also the Excellence in Higher Education Endowment. It established the distribution of the 1% severance tax in future years. And it also repealed the legislative deficit control account. That was effective immediately. So that the payment that had been legislated for fiscal year 21 is not going to happen. And then also, as Ian had talked about already, directs the Select Committee to conduct a 2-year study. And then House Bill 219, sponsored by Representative Nicholas, adjusted the membership of the Investment Funds Committee. This was something that had been brought up. And it brought the IFC from 4 to 6 members. It adjusted some of the memberships to be ex officio non-voting. The CIO of the Wyoming Retirement System and the CIO of the State Treasurer's Office are now ex officio, then added one more ex officio member to be appointed by the legislature. And those appointments have been made, and that's Representative Nicholas and Senator Perkins. And finally, House Bill 244 Ian had already talked about that, sponsored by House Appropriations Committee, has a study that the IFC is going to be doing, and the legislation says they're to deliver that to this committee by November 1st, which is about 5.5 months away. And moving on to the section D there, overview of the spending policies. The statutes talk about the spending policies and gives the objectives for what the spending policies are to accomplish in order of importance, and they're bulleted out there. There's 3 principles: consistent, sustainable flow of earnings for expenditure over time, protection of the corpus of the permanent funds against inflation, and to the extent practicable, increases in earnings available for expenditure to offset the effects of inflation. With the exception of the Hathaway Scholarship Endowment, the spending policies for the permanent funds have been expressed as a fixed percentage of the fund's value. And with the adoption of Senate File 121, the spending policy amounts are as shown at the top of page 3, where they're going to be at 5% for the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund, actually for all 3 of the permanent funds. And then the Hathaway Scholarship Endowment, the spending policy on that is the amount necessary to fund scholarships for eligible students. So the interest and the dividends and the realized capital gains from each corpus are used to support the spending needs for the associated programs. And by statute and also by policy that's set by the state treasurer, the realized capital gains are distributed after the end of the fiscal year and subject to covering any losses first. And a reserve account has been established for each fund in the event there's not sufficient investment earnings to be able to meet the spending policy amounts. So really, that's the summary that I had for you. Unless there are any questions, or if you would like to go into the flow charts. The flow charts that are in the memo are from last year's spending policy report that the committee gave to the legislature. They really just show the structure of the fund and the flow of the earnings and the reserve account. And they're a good educational piece for newer members.
And I think we have another chart.
Correct. I do have an updated chart if you would like to see that. Do you want to go through the?
Yeah, why don't you take us really quick? I just thought I didn't change this.
Okay, I would do that. Yes, thank you. Yep, and let me just. Okay, so I've got this up on the screen. And hopefully everybody can see that nicely. Okay, so Senate File 121 made some adjustments to the spending policy flow charts, which have been around for a long time. And we're keeping with them. So starting with the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund, the spending policy amount is 5% of the 5-year average of the corpus. And the corpus of the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund is approximately $8 billion. The investment earnings, and this chart has been updated with the April revenue update that all of the members of the legislature received. And I want to emphasize that this information changes, and the staff brings the final information to the committee in the fall. But where we're at right now, there's been about $317 million in investment earnings for the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund. By the spending policy, the first 2.5% flows into the general fund. That's $194 million. Then the amount above the 2.5% is split equally between the Strategic Investments and Projects account, the SIPA, and the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account, the LISRA. The SIPA is guaranteed by the reserve account to be the full 1.25%, whereas the LISRA is not. So at this point in time, we're looking at probably a small, or not a small, but maybe about a $30 million backfill from the reserve account going into the SIPA. And then with the repeal of the legislative deficit control account, that's going to go away. Senate File 121 also designated where that the revenue stream from the 1% severance tax starting in fiscal year 23 would go to the corpus of the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund. And it would be split one half between this fund and the Common School Permanent Land Fund. And then starting in fiscal year 29, it moves to 2/3 of that revenue stream from the OPSTA. And so everything on this chart that's in red is what has been modified by Senate File 121.
Go ahead.
Oh, do we have a copy of that? On the-
It's on the website, and I think Karen made copies.
Senator Hicks.
Whoever's speaking, if they could turn their microphone on, it would be helpful. Thank you.
Senator Hicks, it is in your packet behind Ms. Scott's memo.
Wait, just for clarification, Senator Kinski, we can't talk about you if our mics are on, but anyway, we'll try and be more careful of that. Thank you, that reminder. So I found it off on the website and the hyperlink there. I think there's another copy. And right at the end, there's behind that tab, there's a yellow page, and behind the yellow page divider there, I think you'll find the 2-page. And so if you, Polly, I don't know if I hate to ask this because it may require you doing math in public. So I'll just apologize in advance,
I
but
don't have a calculator.
so why don't you take us through with, I mean, if you look at this chart, we've got year-to-date earnings in the PMTF for 2021 through March of 317 million and change. So why don't you take us, could you take us through what will happen, because the 2.5% of the general fund, the amount of that first 2.5% that goes to general fund is 194 million. So that leaves about 124 million dollars over and above the 2.5%. So can you explain that, help us understand if you can, and if you need to phone a friend to help you with this, we're more than happy to let you do that. I apologize for making you do math in public, but so anyway, so tell us what'll happen with that other $123 million between the legislative, the LSRA and the SIPA account.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a problem at all. I do want to emphasize these are preliminary results and these
Sure.
can change.
This is just a for instance. This is only
This
by
is just
way
a
of
for instance.
example.
So the full spending policy amount of 5% would be about $388 million. And so through March, the April revenue update that you received reported that there's 317.7 million. Now, part of that is realized capital gains, which that's the piece that changes. So that's very close to the 388 million for the full 5%. But only 1.25% of that spending policy amount is what I call guaranteed. I know that's maybe not the word that's used in statute, but guaranteed to the extent that the reserve account has the money to provide it. So that amount is 291. Maybe I'm wrong on that. So I think that the revenue update said that if the fiscal year ended in March, there would be 61.8 million that would go to SIPA and 68.1 million that would go to LISRA. But the SIPA is guaranteed to the 1.25%, which is 97 million. And so there would be another 36 million that would have to flow from the reserve account. So what you can see there in the reserve account box is that last year we were anticipating or estimating that the balance at the end of fiscal year 21 would be 203.8 million in the reserve account. But now we're seeing there's going to be less backfilling into the general fund and into SIPA. And so we're expecting a higher balance there in the reserve.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. Would you like to go on to the Common School Permanent
Any-
Land?
Yeah, let's do that unless you have other questions.
Before we read that,
Sure, Senator.
Holly and maybe Mr. Chairman, on 121, it was, was it a static 5%? I thought it was a 5%, the 5% of the last 3 or 4 years.
Last 5
previous
years.
5 years, not just a straight 5%. Is that,
Correct.
that's correct, right?
That's correct. Yeah, we're talking
It's not
about
a static 5,
the 5% of the rolling 5-year average.
correct?
Right.
Okay,
Mhm.
but it is of the 5-year rolling average.
Yes.
All right. Not the balance and the count as it currently exists today.
No.
All
No.
right.
This is the
Correct.
5-year rolling average as of the end of the previous fiscal year.
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the box there with the PMTF corpus does have the 5-year average as of 6/30/2020.
It's in the chart. Polly just said it's in the chart. It's not
7.8.
Ragu, it's in there.
7.8 billion.
Okay.
One other thing I might point out is that Senate File 121 did repeal the prior legislated step down of the spending policy amount. It had been legislated to step down to 4.75% in fiscal year 23 and 4.5% in fiscal year 24. And in this fund, 0.25% is about $20 million. So,
It's about, yeah,
Say that again. I didn't catch.
isn't that right?
What's the last thing you just said?
So the fund is $8 billion.
Right.
And so 0.25% is about $20 million. Am I wrong
Okay.
about that? I think I'm right.
What's a few zeros in Senator Parchman?
ain't gonna go away. The SIPA was 1.25 and it was gonna go to 1.
Yeah.
Along with the LSRA.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a full 0.5% drop. So just to say it, I'm gonna say this, how I understand it, and then correct me. I'm gonna say this kind of layman. So as Senator Hicks talked, the 5% of the previous 5-year rolling average. So generally, and I've seen some documents you've worked up that really makes it about it's not a 5% of the current market value, it's 5% of the 5-year rolling average. So it's really about 4.5% spending policy of current market value. And that changes a little bit, 4.6, 4.7 depends. So that's one conservative way. We don't take today's 5%, we take an average of the past. So that's a real conservative piece to that. The other part is we only guarantee 3.75% of this 5% spending policy, the general fund and the SIPA.
Mhm.
Correct? I mean, the other 1.25 of the LSRA, it rides on results.
Mhm.
Is that fair to say it that way? And trying to keep it like at my 6th grade level.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a very good description. I agree with that.
So it's just that, and then, Mr. Chairman, one last thing, and I think I know the answer. We talked about moving that 150% reserve account, but we didn't change that this go around. There's no red marks on that. That stays the same. Okay. And that baby's gonna grow to 276 or so.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Let's
Okay.
go ahead and let the record reflect that Representative Parchman is smarter than a 5th grader. So thank you.
I'm trying to keep it at
He's in 6th grade. He's in 6th. He's expressed it appropriately as a 6th grader. So we'll give him that year. All right. Thank you. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right. Let's go ahead and continue on, Polly.
Okay, so the Common School Permanent Land Fund, also known as this Common School Account within the Permanent Land Fund, is on the next one. This one's, a little more straightforward. There's, as you can see by the flow chart. So the fund, as of 6/30/2020 was 4.1 billion. The 5-year average, 3.9 billion. The April revenue update showed that the interest, dividends, and realized capital gains through the end of March had come to 190 million. The 5-year spending policy amount would be 196.1 million. So very close to that amount, although I must emphasize that those investment earnings can change. And we know that they, if there are losses are covered first before the realized net realized gains are distributed. So in this case, it looks like, there's going to be very little backfilling into the Common School Land Income Fund, which is the account that flows into the school foundation program. And then that's the one that's used to fund all of the school districts. And so you can see an estimated increase in the Common School Permanent Land Fund Reserve account because of the investment earnings that have been distributed in some cases and just reported in other cases. Senate File 121, again, kind of puts the future distribution from the revenue stream of the OPSTA to this account starting in 23. And it's going to be half of it for the first, I think, is that 6 years from 23 to 28? I think that's 6 years. And then starting in 29, it goes to 1/3. Also, everything in red is things that have been changed by Senate File 121. Of course, not everything in Senate File 121 is on these flow charts. There's other things in there too. But the spending policy amount had been legislated to step down in future years, and it's now going to remain static at 5%.
Static until we change it. Yep.
Okay. And we can finish up on, we'll go back to the other one. There really weren't any updates on the other two permanent funds, which is the Excellence in Higher Education Endowment and the Hathaway. Whoops. Can you see that?
It's a billion.
Senate File 121 did change the spending policy for the Excellence in Higher Education Endowment. It had already come down to 4.75%. And so that's what it'll be for fiscal year 21. But in 22, it'll go up to 5%. And it'll remain at that level. There's also going to be a tip into the corpus for the Excellence in Higher Education Endowment of about $10.5 million. And then there's not updated information for the Hathaway at this time. But for the new people, the flow chart does kind of show you the structure and how that's set up.
Where is it? So I don't have that one on my sheet. I've got one for the.
You go back to the original memo. There was just an addendum.
Oh, just back to
two
the memo.
updates. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you. Anything else for us, Polly?
No,
All right, any questions for Polly? Thank you, Polly.
you're welcome.
So with that, our next item on the agenda is our state treasurer. So Treasurer Meyer, welcome. Glad to have you here. We've got here, at least on our list, we've got Dawn. Dawn, we're glad to have you, Dawn. And Mr. Treasurer and Lisa, have we got Lisa with you today too?
Lisa could be on the computer.
Lisa's going to from the studios in is it East Hirschler or West Hirschler?
Morning.
Okay, good morning. So we're glad to have you here today, Mr. Treasurer. Why don't you you see the other, I'm sure you've got other things for us. We're going to talk about the CLA report and your implementation plans and other information you've got for us. So we'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
And so I think how we're going to handle this, a lot of it is in the details. You know that the CLA report was a fairly comprehensive report. And I know I said this during the session, but I'd reiterate that practically everything that the CLA report had in it, we knew in our office were things that we needed to work on. But as the game is played, we got to make sure that an expert comes up and tells you guys what we know, so you believe us, you know. So we've got a lot of work to do in different areas. And we've been working on the areas where in the CLA report, where we have the capacity to. As you know, and we are thankful that you gave us the 3 positions, but if we're going to enact the, everything in the action plan, it's going to take a lot more resources. And part of the things that we'll be looking at, hopefully during the implementation of 244 is deriving the facts where those resources are a little bit more readily available to the management of the investment efforts. I'm going to turn it over to Dawn right now. She's going to give you some of the specific things that we've done as far as implementing part of the CLA report that we have the capacity to jump right on.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Dawn, welcome. And you want us to open up the CLA report, or where do you want us to go?
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is Dawn Williams. I'm the Deputy State Treasurer, and I was just going to walk you through the highlights of the CLA recommendations and to tell you what we're doing with them. That's what I was going to start. So if
Okay,
you would,
sure.
so I'm not really following the report along. I'm just sort of summarizing it. And if you have specific questions, of course, we'd love to entertain those. As you know, the State Treasurer's Office went through this study with CLA of our processes. The report was completed and presented to the SLIB on February 25th and subsequently to the JAC on March 3rd. The CLA offered operational recommendations as well as governance recommendations. The operational recommendations were 3 additional accounting positions, 4 upper management positions, including a CEO. So this is, I call it the alphabet soup. So a chief executive officer, a chief COO, a chief operating officer, a CFO, a chief fiscal officer, and a CCO, chief compliance officer. They suggested we develop a master plan to provide a holistic view of technology infrastructure that automates data access and integrates and automates processes in our office. They suggested we implement an order management system. They suggested we implement middle office as a service software and to add data analytics capability. Thankfully, the legislature authorized us the 3 new accounting positions, and we are in the process of getting those posted. As you've heard from us before, the gears of the HR division at ANI grind slowly. So hopefully by the end of the week, we'll have those posted, but we've been working on them since the budget bill became effective. So thank you again for those positions, because that's going to be a real help for us.
Check your minutes.
The treasurer is supportive of the creation of a chief executive officer position. The remaining management positions that are suggested by CLA, we feel are not necessary. We feel like the roles are filled already by existing staff of the treasurer, deputy, our financial accounting administrator, and our general counsel. Moreover, the salaries of these positions that are suggested would lead to a combined annual, and I have in my notes here over 900,000 a year, but I think it would be even more than that because as contemplated, these positions would be eligible for performance compensation. That's just for us, that's crazy money. So you got it good and cheap with us. That's how we feel. How about that? So we have begun also our holistic review of the technology infrastructure. We've created the RFP for an order management system, which we just got news while I was sitting here that the ETS has given their final approval on that. So we'll be able to post that request for proposal this week. An order management system is used by our investment team as kind of what it sounds like to place the order, to manage the orders that they place for.
So a quick question
trading.
about that, Dawn.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. So as you implement, I would assume that, but I don't know. So that's why I'm asking that the order management system is something that would be relatively uniform. I mean, you've got it there. I'm sure there's more than one out there, but there's a systems out there. Is there anything peculiar about the order placing that happens in your office that would be different than the order placing, order management in any other trading office?
Mr. Chairman, I think in this case, we're actually able to say, I don't think so. I don't think we have any situations where that are going to be too very special. You say that's true, CIO person?
Okay.
And so, yeah, in this one particular case, I think we're going to have an opportunity to receive several responses to our request for proposal that we'll be able to sift through and really have a choice of who to choose from.
So as you implement, so I understand that there'll be some customization. I understand it's just not that, it's not like plugging in it's not like having, pulling up Word on your brand new laptop and off you go. I'm sure there's a little bit more to it than that, but I mean, what's your implementation schedule? So if it's out there, it's not going to be custom. So there'll be some adaptation and implementation, but what's the implementation you see the time frame about having that purchased and used and the training and all that to be done by the new users in your office?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. Based on preliminary discussions with vendors, we think that's going to be 6 to 9 months is our anticipated. We were hoping it was going to take less time, but as we visited with them, they were like, oh no, we have to get the data loaded, verify the data, practice the transfers, train the people. So hopefully by the end of the year, that's our goal.
So let's go ahead, Mr. Vice
So
Chairman.
you said you visited with vendors. Who have you visited with? And just going to describe the process you've followed so far?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So a couple members of the investment team contacted, we currently work with Bloomberg. And so we talked to Bloomberg about their order management system. We have visited with, and just in generalities, we've visited with, our BlackRock, we have our Aladdin software, we have, so several of our current vendors. We also have our staff that's worked with order management systems before and are aware of these vendors. So we kind of we needed to get a price point, for these preliminary discussions, as well as to determine timelines so that we could include that in realistic timelines in the RFP and what the ranges are, because, you could go anywhere from $100,000 to $1 million a year. So we wanted to just kind of focus that in and kind of narrow down what the capabilities were out there.
So with Aladdin and your other software components, I mean, some of the information you provided has said that they're capable of doing a significant amount of this, and you're not fully using their capabilities just because you haven't got there yet, and the manpower and whatever those components are. But in general, how do you determine what price point you can afford and that you'll essentially, or will be needed? And in your RFPs, does that have price points listed in it, or it's just this is what we want, and then how they show up? How is it structured?
Mr. Chairman, thanks. We don't want to put that out. As a result of the biennial appropriation for 21-22, we anticipated that we would be purchasing an order management system. And so we do have a budget in mind. And so that was anticipated in our
Mr.
budget.
Chairman, I think what you represented to us when you presented to it was that you have sufficient funds in your current budget to do it.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And so as we get you an order system, so again, we've got our front office, packing cards, this line over here, you just but anyway, see it, we're going to have, so we continue to facilitate the work of the officers. All this in-house. So as we have this order system, so how are we going to what's the transition? What's that going to transition? Office functions. How is it affect that? And how we get there? Have more of the process.
It'll be helpful eventually.
Yeah.
We'll realize it, but we.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sure that's a great question. What was it?
So, yeah, never mind. I don't want to ask it again. No, I was asking, thank you, Senator Kinski. I apologize for not turning my mic on for that question. My question was, as we get this new ordering system in, I just wanted to know how that's going to affect our back office operations and if that's going to slow us up or is that going to assist us with our back office operations? How is that going to result and affect the work that we're having to try and continue to bring the back office up to speed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what we're doing is that holistic view of our requirements and technology needs, of which the order management system is one. And that is sort of one of the easier places to start. So it is the beginning of the process of combining all of these technologies between the front, middle, and back offices. And it's one of the easier ones because the order management systems do not require the customization that Representative Nicholas or Co-Chairman Nicholas referred to. So this is it's the first step in the process. One of our requirements in the request for proposal is that this system would have to be able to interface and essentially talk to our other systems. And as you know, for the back office, we have been working with Clearwater and we have our existing system, Broadridge, which is what we call QED. And so those are our two primary options for back office enhancements. And therefore any of systems that we would implement would need to be able to coordinate and interface with those.
So is it going to help us or hurt us in that, or is it just not going to be in effect with the new ordering system when it's installed?
Well, Mr. Chairman, of course, it's going to help us and create efficiencies, but it is primarily for the front office. So the investment.
How is it going to change your interface with the back office, or is it?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that any efficiency in trade order, right now, things are very manual. And this will allow those processes to be automated. It will speed up the trades process. So it will ensure all the verification of the trades. I have my team here with me if you'd like to talk about
so I'm
more
assuming
specifics about.
what I think I'm hearing is that your trading process will be more automated. And so at least at that part, it's going to be more efficient. There's not going to be quite as many pieces of paper and quite as many. There can be more automated checking and verification that right now you're doing by hand.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's true. Let me look at my experts.
Okay.
Okay, very
You
good.
got the thumbs. We got the thumbs
They've
up.
educated me
in the back of the
properly.
room for those who are watching. So
Very good.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mike. Excuse me, Senator Guru.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Deputy Director. I just want to make sure I have it straight now. Going back to the back of the house. I'm reading from the report here and under the people section, it says financial accounting division professional skills have been elevated over the past 18 months. New hires have accounting degrees, professional certifications, and or relevant experience. So those are the people referred to, what they're referring to here is the people that we hired from a couple of years ago when we started. We started out, we needed some people because some folks left and during the transition, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is actually not only that, but as time has passed in the last couple of years, we have transitioned some existing staff to newer qualified staff.
Okay, follow up.
Go ahead.
And so then the new 3 hires that we put in this year in this year's budget augment that.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, that's correct.
And so that's reflected in the org chart that we see later on in this report, correct?
Mr. Chairman, I believe those are in there, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Representative Schwartz.
Well, thank you, Mr.
You're
Chairman.
being tag teamed by the Teton folks. So go ahead, Representative.
Well, that's one way to look at it. Thank you. Good morning, Don. It's nice to
morning.
see. I'm just, could you give me a sense of the timeline of this and how, I mean, you said 6 to 9 months, but I assume there's multiple pieces that will be occurring. How's that all going to interact?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz. So what we anticipate is the RFP will be let this week. It's out there for a couple of, the process is through procurement office at A&I. And so the RFP is out for people to respond to by the end of the month. They can then submit any questions to us, and all of the questions have to go through procurement so that all of the vendors have the same information and response. Then once the deadline is May 31st, then those submissions come back to us for review. And then we invite the top 2 or 3 candidates, whatever, if we get some good responses, we invite them to speak with us personally or via Zoom, as the case may be. Some businesses aren't back. And then we make a decision. And so by the end, and then we do a contract. So realistically, I don't know if we can get the contract completed by June, but we can certainly have the selection of the vendor completed by June. Then the vendor comes and starts to work with our investment team and our accounting team, and they talk about, how we use the system and what kind of information they need. Also, I would be remiss, we have our IT team that's clearly going to be involved in that transition of data. So that's where we start. And then what they'll do is once they get the data loaded and the process is down, they'll train our folks, and then we'll be up and rolling.
Go ahead, Ms. Wester.
So just to follow up on that. So in your RFP, I'm just curious how or who you use to craft it. Because your RFP will obviously control the cost, the timing, all those things. And in your RFP, I presume it will have to talk to Clearwater. It'll have to talk to Aladdin in some mechanism, fashion or another. And presumably, at least from what the report said, Clearwater says they can do about half of what that RFP does. And so does the RFP contemplate keeping Clearwater, or tag teaming with Clearwater, or stacking of those? And so then my follow-up question would be, did you have assistance in writing the RFP from the appropriate personnel that actually understands all of those entities that are out there, including Clearwater and their competitors, to make sure that your stack is most comprehensive, best bang for your buck, and gets done what you need to get done?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, we used RFP for specific OMS RFPs for STO. This is my funny alphabet soup. We use specific templates from other states for order management systems to follow along, to make sure that we were including those comprehensive requirements that you're talking about. The assurance is, well, that will be our job to assure that whatever order management system we select will be able to interface and talk to our existing systems and our future systems, which may or may not be Clearwater. So, but yes, so then we also have to go through, we have to do I can't remember what they call it, but it used to be a business case and through ETS. And so we have to lay out our plan. We have to get that approved by them first. Then we create the RFP. Like I said, then we went out and got templates from other states for their order management systems, and then use their templates to ensure that we're inclusive of what we, so we didn't forget anything basically, and to assure all of the things that you mentioned. And then we have to give it back to ETS for them to say, okay, did you do everything that you said you were going to do? Does this follow best practices? Does this follow, are you making sure that you've included everything that you needed to do to be successful? And we just received that back from ETS today to give us the go ahead and post it, put it out there on our procurement website.
But so just out of curiosity on the database or the reporting mechanism, at the end of the day, you've executed the order. There's that data stream that comes out of the order management system. And does that end up, when you pick that data system, does that end up designating a specific back-end accounting to understand and interpolate and then manage that data in the back office? Or is that an open enough architecture that we're not going to, it doesn't specifically or predestine a certain back office system to work a certain way, or does it?
Mr. Chairman, no, it does not. The order management system is primarily for use by the front end, and it interfaces with what the report, the CLA report refers to as the middle office, our trade settlement folks. And so it doesn't necessarily, it will talk to whatever back off our accounting system is, but primarily it's the interface between front and middle for settling those trades.
Right, and right now that interface is mostly a manual input into spreadsheets. And so, I mean, ultimately, I'm assuming that our vision is that somehow to the point where we're bypassing and we're having more automated interface as opposed to manual interfaces. That's where we're trying to head, right? Okay, all right. Thank you.
That's what we've been doing with a lot of things, just trying to get rid of the plug and play things, but basically, you know, making sure that a lot of these things, rather than typing it in from an email or something like that, that the actual email actually loads the spreadsheet. So Jeanette Beeman has done a lot of stuff, you know, basically to automate our spreadsheets. So, you know, we're doing that. This will actually allow a lot of automation going into those. And it takes so much time because you have to run these things side by side for several months to make sure that everything is populating in the right areas and everything is clearing in the proper way.
Mr. Chairman,
We do.
Mr. Chairman,
Who we have?
Lisa.
there?
Lisa's.
Oh, Lisa, there we are.
I would just like to add on, if I may quickly. The RFP absolutely requires the OMS to directly and automatically communicate with trading systems, brokers, accounting system, and it has to interface with Bloomberg, QED, Broadridge, Clearwater, JP Morgan, Market Access, Goldman Sachs, and TradeWeb. And in addition, I just wanted to make sure you understood that within our team, our IT systems analyst, Jeanette, as well as experts on our investment team who have lots of knowledge and in fact doctoral degrees, also helped fashion the RFP. So it was looked at from all manner of perspectives, in addition to reviewing the other RFPs from other states and working with ETS.
All right, thank you. Okay, anyway, continue on.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you, Lisa. CLA also offered some governance recommendations. The first was to transition the Investment Funds Committee from an advisory role to a board format with oversight and responsibility for the organization. And the second was to establish the investment and related accounting functions of the State Treasurer's Office as a separate legal entity, in part to provide independence from political influence. The legislature responded to these recommendations with House Bill 244, which directs the IFC to conduct a study. This is what Ian was speaking to you about this morning and what you're all certainly fully aware of, which directs the IFC to conduct a study and prepare a report of the alternative management of the investment of state funds. The IFC is meeting on Friday this week for our quarterly meeting, and House Bill 244 is on the agenda. So this meeting occurred just a couple of days before the IFC has even had a chance to convene to discuss how it wants to proceed. However, in the meantime, STO will focus on recruiting and training those additional accounting staff while pursuing the modification and addition of investment and accounting processes and systems. These are the things that we were planning on doing and will continue to do, and also be willing to staff and support the studies of your committees.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chairman.
So I'm just curious, in terms of your office management and when COVID came and then basically the office people were working from home. How is that? What's your practice now? How many folks show up? How many work from home? How's that working?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Last week, we adopted a hybrid system of teleworking in the Treasurer's Office. So, and it began last week. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, folks are in the office from all of the teams except our unclaimed property team. The unclaimed property team is going to work full-time in the office. But everybody else in the office has the option to work 3 days in the office, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, with Mondays and Fridays being telework days, working from an alternate location. And our folks, I think to large credit, I mean, probably of IT people all over the state, but we especially have a great guy in Mitch Hayden who got us set up and situated to work from home. And we really did not miss a beat. It has been, I was very proud of them, but I like having them back. And so I think people like being back as well. So that's what we're doing. And so far, so good. Okay, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. I think the treasurer wanted to speak a little bit more about his plans for implementation of the new legislation.
So not sure how much of this will bleed over into the Investment Funds Committee report, but what we've done and working on, and I just got the last proposal on that just this morning. So essentially we wanted to outline 244, say what was in it, the major parts, put that in an outline form, and then go through and look at all of the different proposed types of organizations that are out there. And we've done some good discussions with Josh at RBK, and myself and Matt have put together some things that basically we're going to develop a matrix to actually give us an objective opinion about the data that goes into that. And kind of as if you, I think the proposal was to, start new, like how would you build this thing, if you were setting it up today. And so that's kind of the where we're starting at, the jumping off point. We're going to bring in and get a lot of information, but I don't want to put too much in 5. Just looking at the what I like to call the rainbow plan here, and you guys have all got this from CLA, and trying to be as holistic as we can and not cherry pick completely the plan, just a few things that we do like, but to understand that there's a lot of areas in there that need some, I think, some attention. And so really the people, processes, and systems, that's where we're going to really put a lot of our emphasis, because that's essentially where the rubber hits the road. That makes sure that your operations are running smoothly. And if you got a smooth running operations, then your investment team, who essentially is an independent investment team now, under the direction of the CIO, that's statutory. So they'll be able to do the job that they need to do. So that's where we're going to really put a lot of it. As far as the other areas there, whether it's a chief strategy officer, a CIO, a COO, compliance, or some of the other things, Lisa has really done, I think, a stellar job in really stepping up to be the chief compliance officer, and she's our lead counsel. You heard from her today earlier. I can tell you, I get about every week, I get things that I can't trade, and days I can't trade on, and times I can't trade. And so I'm saying to myself, I might as well just not trade stocks anymore myself, because to be in compliance, essentially, if you're the treasurer or his family or anybody in the office, there are days where you're just shut off, And so we're doing things in compliance now that are really, I would say, dotting the I's and crossing the T's and stepping that up. So I think we're in good shape as far as that goes. We're meeting that quality in that recommendation in the CLA report. I think that you can always have more professionalism in the office, and that's something that even before I was treasurer, I asked the last treasurer to hire a chief operating officer. And in January and February, the first year I was treasurer, we had a chief operating officer for a short time, but we found out that the person that was in that position didn't have the background and experience to be able to carry out the job. So I think that in those areas there, Don has really stepped up and started to do a very good job in that area of chief operating officer. But I think that we still need to bring more areas of expertise in investing in the organizational structure. Now, Don did talk about the cost of this, and when we look at it and we do our matrix, we're going to do everything on a net of fees, net of cost basis as far as the return. So you can see that, and I don't know whether Patrick will talk about this in the asset allocation that we put in response to the risk portfolio, but there's going to be some increases in the amount that we are paying for managers, but those are all net of fees when you look at the asset allocation returns. So those are actually baked in the cake. But if you look at what would be baked in the cake as far as different areas, the CEO is going to cost you probably $800,000 a year with the bonuses. And now we got to think about, well, is it well worth it? And so we'll do some analysis there. But I can tell you that even at $800,000, it's probably just barely current with some of the endowment models out there that have a different funding mechanism. So, without the performance payments that we have, we wouldn't even be in the labor market. But I can say that labor market is getting higher and higher. If you're going to get the best top-notch people, you're going to be paying these folks like football coaches' salaries. And just so you know that you don't have sticker shock, but we're going to make sure that when we go through this analysis, that if we're going to put a professional team in place like that the analysis will actually show that it's worth it to have them in place. And I think in a lot of areas it is. But it's a long-term aspect. You're not going to get the returns that some of these folks have had that have been in place 20 or 30 years, because they put in place the things that we were just able to put in place because you guys changed the risk analysis for us to invest this year. And they've had these things in place as far as private credit, private equity, for decades. So we're still in the infancy, I guess is what I'd say. So don't expect, snap your fingers, bam, you're going to get these huge potential increases, because the risk that's associated with some of these organizations, and we'll score this on risk also, because you got to realize is that, between your risk and your asset allocation, that's 95% of your return. What we're doing with governance is on the margin. That's that 5% of trying to get up and elevated. So 95%, we've already got that in place, but we'll also make some decisions as far as discovering who in these other organizational structures are actually making the decision on asset allocations, who's actually making the decisions on risk. It's pretty cut and dry right now. Right now, legislature makes all the decisions pretty much on risk. And the SLIB board makes pretty much all the decisions based on allocation, and that's with the advice and consultation of the IFC. Advice of the treasurer and consultation of the IFC is how those work. But, so we're going to find out how everybody else is doing it, what they're actually getting back. And that's part of, I think, of the implementation of the action plan, is to make sure that when we do it, we know we're doing it and we're getting, and I think as Representative Harshman said, the best bang for the buck. We don't want to spend football coach salaries if we're not going to get the best bang for the buck. But I do think that we can bring more professionalism into any organization that moves forward. But you guys are going to have to go in there with your eyes open, knowing what that costs. There is one thing that, an anecdotal thing that I'd like Dawn to share about the discussion that she had with, there's an organization that we belong to, the National Association of State Treasurers. Well, she has a deputies call. I think, is it once a month, Dawn? Yeah, but she posed a question to the other deputies and the state treasurers. And it was surprising to me the answer that she got back, and it might surprise you guys too.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members, so one of the tenets that the treasurer supports very ardently is the idea of autonomy or independence of HR functions and of budgeting in the state treasurer's office. And so I asked the question at my meeting yesterday, I said, do any of you other states have that? Because maybe we're just out on a limb here thinking that that's a good idea. And every single state responded that they do. They said, well, we're a separate elected office. Why wouldn't we be able to hire and fire the way we want? Why do we have to go through the governor? Why do we go through the executive branch? That's crazy. And I said, well, it's not crazy. That's what we do, but maybe it is crazy. But anyway, it was very interesting to me. I didn't expect that answer. And then they all talked about that they still go through the legislature for their budgeting and that they are self-funded, which is essentially what happens with our investment team and accounting team. Most of, that we're funded through investment earnings. There is a piece of general fund, of course, in the state treasurer's office for the admin team, but the investment accounting team. But that, like I said, that still goes through the legislatures in those states as well. That's what the treasurer was wanting me to share.
And I guess kind of in closing, looking at the rainbow plan down here, at the end of the list, CLA talked about the governance, and I'll just briefly read this. It says board membership to include necessary investment management oversight experience. The state treasurer is the chairman of the board. In this manner, the state treasurer's office retains authority over portfolio governance. And I think that we're going to look at several different types of organizational areas, private, quasi-state, status quo, and hybrid. And I would guess that at some point that will probably end up with the Wyoming model. That would probably be a hybrid of some kind. There's some things that we want to make sure that we retain. Sovereign immunity, I think, is extremely important, and to make sure that the investments aren't taxed, not only in our jurisdiction, but in foreign jurisdictions. That's extremely important. We just hired a new, tax recovery person to deal with the country of France, because the French like to tax all of our investment income there. And JP Morgan, excuse me, I should not have used that term, but our custodial bank is having a hard time getting that clawed back. So we hired someone else to do it on a commission basis to claw back those taxes. So we want to make sure that whatever structure we do have, takes into account what happens in the outside world and how that affects our profitability. So there's a lot of really, really important things. Most of those Josh from RBK came up with, Matt and I added to the list a little bit. And then we'll have the IFC look at that list and that matrix. And then we'll go about getting the survey and getting the information. And the facts will really, at the end of the day, speak for themselves about what should work. And then there is political realities that may or may not be functional with where we're at right now. I'd like to do that. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you got any more questions, Mr. Chairman, in that regard, I think that we pretty much went through that. I do have a couple of suggestions when you get to, I think it was 121. Was that the one with the constitutional provisions and income? Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we should be. Yeah. 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 Yeah, if you remember 2 years ago, that was on the treasurer's, I guess our annual meeting and had some good discussion on that. I think Josh will be a great help to you guys. We'll try to get. Great. Yeah. Yeah. Look forward to that.
Mr. Chairman? Thank you. While I have an opportunity, when the treasurer mentioned the annual conference, I just wanted to take an opportunity. You may have seen an email with our registration form. We're going to plan on meeting in Saratoga in August, and I just want to take this opportunity to invite you personally to come and join us for that weekend. I did. Now we actually sent a real live registration form. It's on. Save the date now, put it in pen. Mr. Chairman, no, we usually had it that last weekend of August, that Sunday and at times the Capital Select Committee on Capital Financing has held their meeting in conjunction with that, with our conference at the end of it. And we have the room reserved in case you're interested in doing that again. The Saratoga Inn used to be the Saratoga Inn. Now they call it the Saratoga Hot Springs Resort. But still the same cool place. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Real quick question. So future meetings, we did the one in Jackson a couple of years ago where we piggybacked off the Federal Reserves. Is that in the plans for 2022 to try to do that again, or what's the possibility of that?
Mr. Chairman, we'd like to do that. We wanted to do that this year, but the availability in Jackson for us did not exist. The Grand Teton Lodge is, because of COVID, they have fewer staff. They generally put their summer help into cabins where there's 4 of them. And because of COVID, they're limiting that to 2. And as a result, they aren't doing any events, is what the person told us there. And the other place that was viable was already booked. And we looked at a couple of other places, and the prices in Jackson are in most cases double because they are in a recovery mode. Last year, that's our understanding anecdotally, but we were unable to secure a location there.
Mr. Chairman, I found that when we did that and had access to like the representative from the St. Louis Fed there to be able to stay over was tremendously valuable. And I'm sure that takes a lot of pre-planning, but for 2022, if we could do that, I think that'd be outstanding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you. We appreciate your time this morning. Well, I'm sure hear more from you in a moment. We've got Patrick. Why don't you, I think you're next on the agenda. Mr. Fleming, we're glad to have you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
While Patrick's getting ready, I wanted to ask this. If the treasurer's still going to be around later, are you going to be around so we can ask maybe some other questions later?
I'll be around. You can bend my ear on you.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Fleming, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Patrick Fleming. I'm the CIO for the Treasurer's Office. And today I would like to follow the agenda that we have and just comment on some of the things that you've asked for. So in the presentation that I had submitted, there is the Select Committee on Capital Finance Investment. I'll be speaking from this initially. This presentation, I know there's some other numbers, and I'm going to try and keep this to a high level unless you want to really delve into some of
So we're starting with
numbers.
the office performance report? Or the slide deck that you put together for us, Select Committee on Capital Financing and Investments? Yep, there we are. All right,
Correct, Mr. Chairman. I'm just following the agenda. I'll be addressing the plan for implementation of Senate File 119 and 120 initially. So with the passage of the bills, if you turn to the first page for the IPS, Section 12 Risk Management. So just to reiterate what we were trying to do here, the current policy that we've had of the 70% limitation for equities limited some of the investments that we were able to invest in because of the definition of equity. And so what this bill was able to do is to look at the risk of a 70-30 portfolio and just keep the risk the same, but to do away with these old terms that really were not reflected in today's asset investments and the risk associated with those. So this first paragraph, I just want to highlight, this is proposed language that will be implemented in our June 3rd SLIB meeting that we will present to the SLIB for approval. But what it is stating is talking about that we'll have the 70-30 risk portfolio that will be the overall guiding limitation of risk that the portfolio will take. But also if you look at the very last sentence, additionally, the board expects total portfolio risk should be managed with the goal of avoiding annual losses greater than 22% with a 99% confidence level. So that is the same language that we've always had. And I just want to make sure that everyone understands by changing this, we're not looking to take additional risk on this. We just want to change the different asset classes to allow us to get a higher yield. Now, if you turn to the next page.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice President.
With the language reading the 70-30 global equities, is that broad enough to include like risks, some of the other asset opportunities that we may have? Is that language broad enough to accomplish that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, yes, that by changing it to just the volatility associated with the 70-30, that will allow us to encompass anything that we want to invest in within those asset classes. And what on the next page, I'll be able to show you what our current allocations will be and where they will fall.
So Patrick, the way I understand this is what it is, it says, okay, your volatility and risk is going to be, this is just setting the boundaries around the field. And so this is the volatility and risk. And so when we talk about that, are we talking about the portfolio as a whole? Or are we talking about each individual investment being within that risk, those risk boundaries and the volatility boundaries that are set by the statute that we passed?
Mr. Chairman, each individual fund will have its own, the SLIB sets the volatility of each one of the funds. So for instance, the PMTF is much more of an endowment type of fund, and it has a much higher risk portfolio profile.
But the risk portfolio all has to be within this new structure we've set up, which is the 70-30 structure we've just set up. And so my question is, so ultimately they have to be within that. Is that the portfolio? So we're talking, since you brought up the PMTF. So the PMTF as an overall function has to be within that risk, those risk boundaries, or does each individual investment within the PMTF have to be within those risk boundaries?
No, Mr. Chairman, the total portfolio.
Okay.
So there will be definitely instances, MLPs, certain equities, private equity that would be above a 22% risk with a 99% confidence interval. But when you take the entire combination of the portfolio is the key.
And so as the SLIB and the IFC set the investment policy bands, that mixture within the allocation that we're going to allocate assets within a particular fund, those all together are going to be within that risk tolerance that we've set. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And if you want to look at the next slide, I have the example to show you each one of the funds.
I'm just waiting. In fact,
Bated breath.
I'm on that page right now. Go ahead.
So if you look at this is the current IPS target is the left level, it is the left side. The proposed target is in the middle, and then the proposed interim target. And I want to just comment a little bit on the interim. The transition that we're doing here is fairly significant, and it is going to take potentially up to 5 years to be able to implement this. For instance, the private equity part, we will be allocating $215 million per year to private equity. It is very, very difficult. If we went out and wanted to do $1 billion, one, it doesn't fulfill the pacing schedule, and what you want to do is have an investment spread across numerous years. But it's just very hard to do, and you'd be putting them into funds that would be suboptimal. So that's just one example. Private credit infrastructure, these will take time to do so. But we also want to increase the risk profile on a shorter term basis. So some of the things that we could do is take that private equity exposure, for instance, and to put it into a public equity investment. So we can get certain things on in a more timely manner, but it will also help us to do this transition in a smoother and better. I would just say it would be a better opportunistic environment, because as you all know, which I will get into, the markets are extremely expensive. So the last thing we want to do is put on a ton of risk right at this juncture. So with that,
That's how I operate, though. I always buy high and sell low. Is that, I got that backwards, do I? Okay, anyway, go ahead.
so if you look at the very bottom on the yellow boxes, I have the red star to the left-hand side. This is the part that we're talking about. And this is the total return focused funds, which would encompass the PMTF. But if you see the current portfolio right now, which is in the far left box, it shows you that it has a standard deviation of 10%. So that shows you that right now, the portfolio that we're dealing with is significantly under the risk parameters. But what we wanted to do is have the flexibility. So for instance, let's say we have a big market sell-off and volatility rises dramatically. We want to have that flexibility then to go to the SLIB and say, hey, we need to take more risk and be able to buy some of these cheaper assets, even though volatility is higher. So that is why it's so important to have this structure, but just so you can see where we are. And then the current confidence level, the 99% confidence level. So you take a Monte Carlo simulation, you take like 5,000 different simulations, and you say, okay, with all these simulations within 99% confidence, a 3 standard deviation event, that would only happen 1% of the time. So it does happen when you have these big sell-offs, but it's just highly unlikely that it would happen frequently. But right now, we have a 22% limit. And as you can see, we're only at 20. Now, if you go to the box below it, this new portfolio, if we did do a 70-30, the 99 confidence level would bring you all the way up to 31. So a significant amount of more risk. And that's why I just want to make sure everyone understands this is not our intention by any means, is to take on significant risk at this time. And in fact, if the IPS is passed as we hope it will be, just as what we've always done, it will hold that 22% limit. So just so you understand where we are, we're not looking to take on more risk. It's just to have the flexibility that we could put it on if need be. And then you can also see the other, we have the proposed target that does bring us to the 22% as we're implementing the structure. But just so you understand where we are, these are the asset classes, Mr. Chairman, that you were talking about, and you can see the percentages of them, and all of those combined would then add up to the current standard deviation at 10% with a 22% confidence level.
Go ahead, Ms. Vice President.
Real quick, Patrick, could you just describe, how do you go about calculating the standard deviations through your modeling to get that? I mean, is this a standard investment package that comes in, you plug it in and it looks at VIX or whatever those issues are and kicks out a number? How is that number generated?
So the classic standard deviation definition is what you're doing is you're looking at the dispersion from the mean. So if you have numerous asset classes, RBK has a 10-year forecast of each one of these asset classes and what the expected volatility would be. And so then you look at the dispersion of each one of those means. You basically take the difference, you take the square root of that, and you come up with a standard deviation calculation. And that's a very simplistic way. And that comes up with your standard bell curve that all of you have seen. So 1 sigma, 1 standard deviation on either side of the mean. You take both sides of it and it comes up with 68% of the time. So at 68% of the time, you would anticipate that within 1 sigma, 1 standard deviation, your returns would fall within that category. Then you go out to 2 sigmas, which would be 95, and then 3 sigmas, which is actually 99.7. It's not quite the 99. So we're not quite at a 3 sigma move, but 3 sigma moves are very rare. We have them, they're becoming more frequent. But it's the 1 in 100-year flood that happens every 10 years. But anyway, that's, and so that would be the standard deviation calculation. Now this is really, I'm getting into more of the details. It's considered VAR, value at risk. But that's where you take a Monte Carlo simulation, as I mentioned before, and you take, over 5,000 iterations and saying of all of these things that happen within that 3 sigma move, how often would this happen? And that's where you can see this, the current portfolio is only at 10%, but if you moved out almost 3 sigmas, you would actually have that situation where you would lose 22% of the portfolio, which is a significant hit when we're talking about $2 billion out of the PMTF. So that is how it's calculated in the concerns that we'd have. Now, a 70-30, you're going to hit, you almost have a $3 billion loss. So that's much more significant. And that's why we really focus on our risk and try to mitigate that risk. It is one of the most important things we focus on.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up based on that. So is this an annual assessment? Because you just talked about the volatility. It can change very rapidly as to what that would look like based on the current conditions, right? And so 2 questions. How often do we go back and look at the standard deviations to make a determination that we're within that risk assessment, the 70-30 that we're talking about? And then who's actually doing that? Is RVK providing that service for us? So how often and who's doing it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, yes, that's a great question. And what we do is when we go through our annual asset allocation, we will do that every time we do that on an annual basis. So it's performed at that time. Now, one of the things that we have been working on very, very hard is to try and get an updated risk system. So historically, I have no idea what that number would be until at least a month and a half afterwards, just like what these reports are. They're March 31 numbers that we just got last Friday. It takes much longer time to do so. Once we have a Clearwater or whatever system, but we also implemented or have what is called Aladdin Risk, and it is by far the top-notch risk system out there. And right now we are in the process of developing this. I was hoping actually to have a preview for you at this meeting, but we weren't able to get it done. We're still working with Aladdin, but I will have a daily risk assessment of showing exactly what happens. And I've done this long enough where I have numerous different metrics that I look at. I can take like a 40-day moving average where the last 40 days have much higher, just getting into the weeds, but we can look at a lot of different things where I'll know the entire portfolio risk every single day, how much that portfolio should move if, for instance, the S&P is down 2%. What should happen? What should our manager performance be? It'll be fabulous when we have this. We'll be state of the art, one of the best risk systems and funds. We'll know our risk better than 99% of the competitors out there.
Mr. Chairman, and just one more follow-up along that line. So based on that discussion, how do we calculate risk looking forward instead of backwards?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, that is more of the art than the science. So what we do is we will take historical precedents. So in that daily performance report that I'll have, we have various types of risk analysis. So what we would do is we would say, all the way back to the early 90s, we'd say, okay, Kuwaiti invasion. We'll have a COVID number. We'll have a great financial crisis. We'll say if interest rates go up 100 basis points. So we put through all of these scenario analysis, and then the devil's in the detail. Do you shock the curve where the whole thing goes up by 100 basis points, which would never happen. The shape of the curve would change. And what that would do to long duration assets like tech, to real estate and so forth. So it's more of an art than a science, but it is, that is a very important part of what we do.
Mr. Chairman, when we get forward guidance for the Fed, you can anticipate fiscal and monetary policy and the potential impact on our investments. I mean, that would be part of the future-looking risk analysis.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, especially in interest rates are so much easier to forecast because you have a coupon, you know what you're going to get. You own a 10-year bond at 168, you're going to get 168. It's easy. The equity part of it is much more different. As our debt to GDP level goes from 100 to 200 over the next 20 years or what have you, what will that be? Will that fiscal expansion cause interest rates to go up significantly because it's going to have a deleterious effect on our interest payments? And then what would be the impact onto the equities? That is a much, much harder scenario. And we do not have strong data. You have to go back to the end of World War II to look at our fiscal balance where we are right now. And so at that point, it was very, very different. So that part of it is much more difficult. The Fed and what their forecast numbers are and where the actual numbers are, that's something we look at every day. And when that changes, that will have an immediate impact on interest rates, but the equity part of it is much more difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Past performance is no guarantee of future performance. Anyway, keep going.
Can I
Sure, go ahead.
it's a good predictor though, Mr. Chairman, but just a question. You said you wanted to have kind of a demonstration or show. When are you going to have this fully? What's your midsummer kind of, or what's your plan?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, what we're looking at doing is just have a basic, right now we can look at the overall portfolio and I can look at where we are on the curve and so forth, but I can't drill down into the numbers that I have used for numerous years. And so that's the process that we're on right now. But at our next meeting, I could show you the overall performance and show you the things. But when we get into it, the first part that I'm looking at is doing the fixed income portfolio, and then we're going to do the equity portfolio. And because of the concern that we have managing the money, we're focusing on the internal investments first, and then we'll be able to implement the entire portfolio. There are certain issues that we have where, for instance, hedge funds do not tell us. We don't have a look through into their holdings. So that part is more problematic because we don't know actually what they have because they don't want to tell anyone. We've seen what happens when they tell people what they own. So that will be what we do is just estimate. And this is what's fabulous about Aladdin is it will take that portfolio and see how it performed in a certain scenario and then forecast those numbers. But at our next meeting, I will have something for you to see as far as the whole build out. It is a never ending process. You will never have something that you will always change and look at, tweak it, make it better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
The next part of the agenda would be the performance. And before I start that, I didn't know how much in detail that you would like to go through, but I do have a 5-page presentation if you care just to go over the valuations, big picture valuations. And I can hand those out if you care, or I could just talk through.
Well,
what's
go ahead and
happening.
hand them out and we'll just keep plugging along.
So, Mr. Chairman, normally, as you know, I'll start off just where we are in the big picture. And as you go through, you'll be able to see this. It's just a 5-page slide, and I've addressed this numerous times. And all of you who have been looking at the markets and understanding what has been happening, we're right now the most expensive that we've been in both bonds and fixed income that I've had in almost 40 years of doing this. And it's not that you just sit there and say, oh, yeah, it's expensive, but we quantify everything. And so I just want to show you that it's just not, it's science when you actually to try and quantify these numbers. And so the first page, the first,
Do you have any way that we can share this on the screen? I think our folks out here in Zoom land can't, you don't have, I don't think they have this. Is there any way for us to do a share screen with them? Have you got this by email? Any chance?
Mr. Chairman, no, we just received a lot of the numbers on Friday. So I had this on the side, but I did not send this to Paul.
Okay, we're just gonna go scan it really quick and email it out to these folks. So go
Perfect.
ahead and we can circle back when they get it and ask questions that,
So page 2, the beginning, this is just the CAPE ratio, Schiller PE, whatever you want to call it. But this just shows you what happens when you buy a stock at a very high PE ratio. And the forward 10-year earnings are then impacted. The purchase price is very, very important to the future price. And all this shows is just a scatter plot to show you that when you buy a stock with a PE of 31, your average return over the next 10 years is minus 0.8%.
Chairman,
go ahead.
Could you explain PE for everybody?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator. Yes, your price earnings ratio. And so if you would have bought a stock in 1983, the price earnings ratio was 8. So what you're saying is the price that you're paying in 8 years with the earnings of that stock, you will then get the value.
so let me, I'll break it down. Sixth grade. So what you have is you have if you have a corporation, you have a publicly traded corporation, and we'll make the math real easy. It has 1 million shares and it makes $1 million in that year, then it's making $1 per share. So the earnings per share is $1 and a PE ratio of 8 would say the price of the stock is selling at $8. It's selling at 8 times what the earnings per share was for that period.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
There you go. So now there you go. There's our sixth grade explanation. So go ahead.
And so continuing with that education, today that exact same stock is $31. Nothing's different. The company is the company. It's just what someone is willing to pay for that stock and the future earnings. Now, the problem is these earnings, forward earnings, have been elevated because the way you value a stock primarily is you look at those dividends or earnings and you discount them back to the present value. So if you take the net present value of those future dividends and come back at today's price at a 0 or let's say 10-year discount of 1.68 or 16%, that increases the net present value, the current value today, in lieu of where it would be if rates were higher. So as interest rates go up, the current valuation of the stock goes down. And so part of the reason for that 31 PE is because that interest rates are so low. But also we know that if you would have bought a stock in a low single digit or upper single digit, that the next 10 years would average around a 17% return. Whereas today we know it's theoretically, according to these numbers, that it's going to average anywhere from -3 to +3%. Now, we just don't know. This can continue to go on, the expansion. In Japan, when I was in Japan in 1989, it went from 30 to 65. The PE was, in December of 89, it was 65. So you don't know when the bubble is going to pop. But, the Nikkei at that time was 38,900 and it went down to 7,000. So you know that at some point that valuations will matter, but right now it doesn't. And so that's the difficulty. You don't want to say, hey, now we're going to sell because there's not really a reason with the Fed being where they are and interest rates so low for something to happen. But I just want to highlight that this is the conundrum that we're faced with, is that one, yes, we want to get a higher return on our investments, But we also, our number one objective is the highest risk adjusted return. And right now, the risk adjusted returns right now are the lowest that we've seen. And so it's a very difficult situation, which we've talked about before. Now, the next page is that every week we look at our metrics. This is a 10-year metric and just showing whether you're looking at enterprise value to sales, EV/EBITDA, forward PEs, free cash flow, price book, earning yields, cyclically adjusted price earnings, which is the CAPE, which I just showed you, dividend yield, market cap to GDP, any of the ones that you want to look at, we are between 98 and 100th percentile of richness. So it's just not one metric. The entire market is extremely expensive on a historical basis. The next page, bonds. As I said before, bonds are very easy. This was done, the 2020 trend line at the time, 10-year interest rates were 1.63. All you're talking about is a reinvestment of the coupon. And so if you're buying a 10-year treasury, today's 10 years were yielding 168, you're going to get a 166, you're going to get 166 plus or minus a reinvestment. Bonds are very, very easy. But where does that lie as far as historical interest rates? Extremely low. You know, when I started, 30-year bonds, 10-year bonds were 15.5%. And we're all the way down to this de minimis return where we are right now.
And then there you're just talking about return. That's assuming you don't have to liquidate your position and take a discount because interest rates have gone up from when you purchased your bond rate. So, I mean, you're just talking about, it's easy to calculate return as long as you hold the bond to maturity. If you don't hold the bond maturity, it's a whole different ballgame.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. And as we know, in these low rates, the duration of the portfolio has gone up. So the core bond portfolio that we have a duration of 7. So 1% change in rates causes a 7% move in the price. That is the highest that it's ever been. It's a 6.5 is the.
But that's because interest rates are low. So any modest change in interest rates is a significant percentage, it's just a percentage move. So yes, that's why, right. I mean,
correct. And if you go out to 30 years, you're into a 20-odd duration. So when I see, in-laws and saying, oh, the nice salesperson was telling me we're in bonds because they're very safe. And I was like, well, 3-month T-bills, yes, but 30-year treasuries or 30-year corporate bonds or high yield, no. So that is something that, in one of the reasons why we're doing all of this change in the portfolio is because bond rates are so low and it doesn't give you that cushion in the event of a market sell-off where you're normally going to get 20 to 30% upside appreciation in your bonds. If 7-year treasuries go to 0 right now, we get 9%. That's the duration of the equity. Big deal when you're losing 20 to 30 to 50% like the last bear markets. So that is the whole reason why we're working through and trying to put the portfolio in a better structure to try and prevent some of these things that potentially will happen down the road.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Vice President.
Inflation, or are they not? These calculate the impact. When we look at those annualized returns, are those indexed over that 10-year period for inflation? Are we subtracting that out, or is this just a 10% without inflation calculated into it? In other words, if we have a 2% return, but inflation's 2%, it's really a 0 net gain.
Correct, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that is correct. And that's the next page that I was going to comment on, that is actually the real yields, which is the most important part.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to get to.
But so these are the numbers for those of you who were here or looking through our asset allocation. This is the capital market assumption page that RVK spends a significant amount of time. And if you look at that geometrical, the nominal return, those are the numbers that they are associating with and coming through. This is their best estimate of what type of returns that we're going to have. But I just want to draw your attention to the large cap US stock, which is the 4.8 broad US equity, 4.86%. So that's what they're forecasting that we should receive on an equity portfolio. And then if you look at the fixed income return, which is 1.88, that is the return of the aggregate, the bond portfolio. And if you take a 70-30 portfolio in that, you just take 70% of the 4.86, that gives you about 3.4, 30% of the ag, which is 188, that gives you about 0.56. So you add those together, the 70-30 portfolio should give you about a 4% nominal return. But RBK is also forecasting that inflation is 2%. That gets you at a 2% real yield, which is significantly lower than what we've seen over the last 50 years. It's averaged about 5% real. So these are big pictures, that I just wanted to highlight. This is the 10 to 20 year type of forecast that we're focused with. And we look at our asset allocation, and we try to put together a portfolio that will encompass this, but we're also very, very focused on the short-term returns. So with that, I would then like to show you our returns of where we are. And going back to the initial.
Before you move on,
Yes.
I don't understand this chart. Can you explain that chart to me?
Is that the bond?
Just like what am I looking at on page 5?
Okay, so this is the same thing that we do on equities, but in the valuation metrics that we look at would be on the equity side. What these different 8 categories are the investments that we put forth in the portfolio. So the first one is agency ag option adjusted spread. I'm getting into the weeds here, but an option adjusted spread just tells you what the spread over US Treasuries yields in all of these investments.
So the axis, the y-axis, the vertical axis that starts at 0 and goes to 10, that's the return.
That would be the relative valuation on the spread over US Treasuries. So for instance, if you look at.
But it's a percent.
It's where you are in the historical performance. So if you look at high yield OAS, for instance, it's one of the higher ones because high yield moves around. That shows you now that at 300 basis points over US Treasuries, it is at a 0, the most expensive part or time that it has ever been. It is yielding the lowest amount over Treasuries that you've ever seen over the last 10 years. The lowest, high yield got down to about 256 over Treasuries maybe 15 years ago or so. But that just shows you how expensive it is. There's no room for error because you're not getting compensated for any risk, even in the fixed income.
What is the orange dot versus on the continuum line, each continuum line? The orange dot is
where we are right now. Which is at the very bottom. The lowest yield.
With the exception of bank loans, we're modestly above the bottom.
Correct. And that is one area where we're expanding our portfolio in this intermediate area because it is one of the very few areas that you get a little bit of extra yield over Treasuries, and it's a floating rate instrument. So if rates do go up, we will then not get hit with that same type of duration. The duration of the high yield is 3 months. And so as rates go up, the coupon reset over SOFR LIBOR will adjust with it. And so that's why we are adjusting the portfolio.
And so the continuum line for each individual one that goes, which is the line that goes up to the small black dot vertically, that shows the what the spread, what is that? Is that the total of the what does that represent, the entire line in any one of those categories?
So if you look at the very first one, let's just say agency ag, that's Fannie Freddie, a very high quality implied government guarantee. It's very small, but the highest that yielded over US Treasuries is approximately 50 basis points. And so that's the little stick. The investment grade 1 to 3 year, it's been all the way up to 400 basis points over US Treasuries. But as you can see now, it's much tighter. Mortgages are 9 basis points over US Treasuries now. And so all of this stuff, just because the Fed is buying $120 billion of this stuff every single month, it has just caused this whole thing to become extremely expensive.
Right. Okay, thank you. So if you go back to page 3 then. So that's the same analysis there. We're just talking about spreads and basis points there as well.
Mr. Chairman, this
The
would be different on the equity spectrum. On the equity spectrum, what we're doing is looking at various metrics that we would look at. So EV to sales enterprise value, which is basically what a business is worth, to the sales of the company. Where is that in relation to the spread? So for instance, price earnings, as what we talked about between the 8, which it was back in 80 to the 31, we're almost at that highest ever over the last 10 years on the PE basis. So each one of these is the valuation metric. Price to book, for instance, you're going to get maybe 5 times, book value right now, where normally you would want to buy a stock somewhere around 1 to 1.5 times book value, other than tech stocks, what have you. So each one of these metrics is just very expensive.
Yeah. And then as you look at that, is there still those metrics, is there an inverse, are these metrics kind of inverse between bonds and equities, fixed incomes and equities?
Well, the price earnings part you have, because if you take the inverse, the earnings over price, you can take the yield of an investment. So if it has an earnings component to it, then you can do that relation to the bond price. But some of the other the price to book, for instance, is just what somebody is willing to pay for a company.
But the inverse relationship to me, at the end of the day, fixed incomes are so, the spread, the yield on them is so low now. Doesn't that create the inverse relationship where now it causes the value, it also causes the capital or the equity valuations to be sky high, because people don't want to stay in fixed incomes because they can't earn a sufficient return. So they're more likely to accept the risk of a higher priced equity.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. Yes, and that causes the equity risk premium to go down. And so yes, you're at price to book, for instance, if you can borrow 30-year money at 2.5 or 3% or what have you, therefore the people are going to be willing to pay more for it. So it increases it. So yes, across the board, there is an inverse relationship in most of these valuation metrics.
Okay, anyway, sorry, I digress. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, while you're on the subject of looking at this, Patrick, would you say based on where we're at today versus historical norms that we're in uncharted territory?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, absolutely, when you're looking across the metric of what we have. But as I said, Tokyo in Japan, the emperor, in 1989, I was walking around the Emperor's Palace, and that I don't know, I can't even remember how square miles, 2 or 3 square miles was worth more than the entire state of California. So when you're talking about crazy valuations, a tulip bulb in the 1600s was worth more than the average home price, which is $315,000. Could you imagine buying a tulip bulb for $315,000 right now? So no, across the metrics over time, yes, in the US, but history over time, no. There's other instances where this thing could continue to go. NASDAQ, .com bubble. Yeah. For no revenues, no business. All you had is a .com address.
I'm sorry, you're talking about Facebook? I'm sorry, what were you?
Yeah. They have revenues.
Okay. I wished I had. Go ahead.
So the next kind of overview, and we can go into the actual performance numbers if you care to dive into it, but I will just talk in broad terms right now. And then if you have questions and you want to go specific parts, then I will do that. So on page 4, which shows March performance, so this is 3/31 performance.
And this is out of the one that you handed out. We're back in.
Correct. Now we're back into that one. And I just
Back into
took
the
the
first
main
slide deck.
pages
Yeah.
instead of going through the 30-some page performance. I just went into the main one. And if you want to delve into any of these categories, I can do so.
No, thank you. Go ahead.
So the 1-year performance for the total fund, we are 17.5% for the total fund. The index was 17.4, so we were slightly just 10 basis points over the fund. Financial year to date, 9.3% versus the total fund of 9.1, which is 20 basis points over the index for the short term. And you can see the 3, 5, 10, 15, so I'm not going to comment on that. Once you get out of the total fund, which has very low yielding assets like state agency pool, which is only 10, 15 basis or what have you. The permanent mineral trust fund, the 1-year performance is 26.5 versus the 14.4 for the financial year to date, outperformed that benchmark by 70 basis points. Permanent land funds, you can see all of those. I don't want to go in specific ones unless you have big questions on that. The one I do want to comment on is on page 5, which is the LISRA. And I can answer your questions on any of these performance numbers. So the LISRA, the 1-year return, 14.8. But if you look at the 3 components of the LISRA, if you remember how we changed the LISRA into the short term, the intermediate, and then the longer term, which is encompassing all of the type of riskier assets that are in the PMTF, equities, et cetera. As you can see, the 1-year performance there was very nice at 48.8. And then the other components, which would be the intermediate and short term, which is just the bonds. Now, the problem that we face with the LISRA is that if you look at the profile that was just put out from the Craig, that we're going to have $356 million in June of 2024. As a fiduciary, you cannot look at investing a 10+ year asset into a 3-year liability. So what we would look to do here is take all of this and roll it down into the short-term fund, which yields nothing. What is the yield on this? 20 basis points. Because you don't know when the correction would happen or what have you. And so it's just prudent policy to reduce that. And so the treasurer and I, we've been talking about this, and so we can jigger it a little bit here and there. But if you know that the assets, it's called tenor matching, your asset liability management, which you do in any business. You do not have a long duration asset matched against a short term liability. And so unless those numbers are wrong, we should collapse this and put it into a short-term fund so you know you have the money.
That's a very interesting question. Representative Harshman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think, and you said that's based on the Craig estimate, which estimate for investment returns are like 2.6%, I think. So it's no capital gains or forecasts. And that's really our issue, is because we have this 150% reserve, and that runs out at 2.6% in 3 years on all of our funds. So anything looking past that, it looks tough. And we are doing a drawdown, but we're putting in too, and we don't count that basically. Couple ways probably to fix that: larger reserve or endowment type. Any comments on that? I mean, to me, that's part of the issue, right? I mean,
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, the number one factor of all this 244, everything that we're looking at, is to solve our spending policy. That is by far the most important thing. The way I look at it is that if we have a realistic spending policy where the legislature and no one else can get in, and it's set in stone, it's a constitutional change, We have $2 billion of unrealized capital gains in our books as of 3/31 right now.
Yeah.
And if you had a policy that you don't care, we made the analogy, if you have $100 and you get a 20% return, you're $120. But if all of that $20 is in a unrealized gain, you will not have the 5% spending policy.
It's always better that you're owed it than cheat you out of it, though. Isn't it? So anyway, yeah.
So Representative Harshman, your comment on that is a very important one. And if we can get this part straightened out to where you just have the amount of money that you still have your funds that are in violet. You can't, if you don't have the money to spend, if there's a big sell-off and that 2 billion goes negative, the funds are still in violet. You still can spend the interest income and dividends and the things that you have, but you cannot cause the fund to become inviolate. You can still hold that if you so desired in any bill or anything that you put forth. But that to me is the number one most important thing that we're faced with over the next 2 years.
And that's the big picture. But the small picture that you're talking, the LSRA, just short term, because the Craig only forecasts really about half what happens. I mean, and that's, hey, I'm not arguing to change it. I've fought, I'm 13-0 on the House floor on not recognizing capital gains. I get it, but I just want us to all, it's a conservative revenue estimating group as well. And it should be. I mean, but I just want us to all know that.
And which that's the point is when you look at when you make decisions with respect to the long-term LSRA, to bring this back to the discussion we're at, when we make a decision, I mean, do you make a decision based on Craig, knowing that that Craig doesn't recognize significant portions of what would otherwise be earnings? And so you make a decision to sell all of your LSRA long-term because your time horizon on the long-term profile says it's going to be, you're going to need this within the next 3 to 5 years. Do you sell that off when reality may be substantially different? And that's a difficult question for you. It's a difficult question for us, but that's essentially what we're talking about. And one of the things that we hope to study this year is doing, just what Patrick was talking about. Do we need to change how we do this so that it's less volatile, that we're not worried so much about whether or not we have a recognized capital gain, but we recognize how much we have, recognize the inviolate principles that we need to have, and move on. I mean, that's ultimately one of the things we'll be looking at this year. So thank you for bringing that the spotlight on that for us, Patrick.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could put the question back to you, what would be your best guess if you're saying if 356 is not the number, what would be a correct number? Double it? Would you say 700? What number should, what is a realistic number? Because that is the key.
There you go.
So, Mr. Chairman, Patrick, the other side of that seems to me is with the LSRA is not only the Craig forecast and the potential to run that out, but all the other public purpose investments and obligations, and how does that play into the distributions of the long-term, midterm? And so do you take those out and say, well, those are off the table? And then we've got the Craig forecast that says it's gone in 3 years. So under that scenario, you would never invest anything other than the short terms. So the question becomes back for us is do you want to make a part of the LSRA semi-inviolate from the standpoint that we can? The big question we have is do we have the discipline to keep our hands off of it? And the answer is no. So we're just going to make a policy decision to defer the substantial potential for higher rate of returns. So until we do something on our side, you can't change your side. Until we change the policy and say, we're not going to drain this down to X, you're pretty much limited to short-term investments based on Craig, public purpose investments out of there. So we're our own worst enemies.
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator, so if you remember the structure, it's the first
I know there's a
500.
question in there, but anyway, go ahead, Patrick.
I want affirmation that I'm reading this right.
So the
Anyway, go
first
ahead.
500 would go into the short term, and then we do the mixture into the next two with the bonds and the longer term investments. And so anything north of 500 would be kind of what we would need to focus on. And the treasurer has been working on this diligently for a long time, and we're looking at, well, we don't have to do the 0.2 if we know it's going to be different levels. So it's something that we've been working on, but it's very difficult to come up with the answer when you don't know the initial question of how much that we have. So that's the difficulty that we're faced with.
Sounds like law school. Thanks. It's the Socratic method.
Mr. Chairman, the next page, outperformance estimated financial year to date. And we didn't have the March 30 numbers, but we came up with a guesstimate on that. And so this is the different assets that we have actively managed and that we're judged against. And so in the equity portfolio, that has been the best performance, specifically Arrow Street, which has had a tremendous year so far. But we're $64 million ahead of the index in that category. The hedge fund opportunistic, that one has been, the hedge fund component of it has been more problematic. And the reason being is if you look at what's happened in many of the equity classes, the very low quality equities have done very well. And so most of the hedge funds and the structure that we're proposing, because of those valuation metrics that we just went over, we will underperform when the market rips. And that's basically what's happened since last March. It's done very well. So we are positioned that in a down market or a sideways market, we should do well in these portfolios, but in a very, very strong market, we will underperform because we just don't believe in buying 300 PE stocks and so forth. And so that's the issue there. But if the market does stay the same or corrects, this is a portfolio that I think will do very well. So I'm, even though year to date, it's down 51 million versus the index. And then there's numerous instances with some of the part of the index where you have very small cap performers that have great returns, 50 to 100% returns that, we can't even invest in. So it's 30% of the index we couldn't probably even invest in. So there's issues there, but the bottom line is we underperformed, and I'm very comfortable on the reason why we underperformed. It's not the managers, it's the structure that we're looking at, because we want to be much more conservative when valuations are this expensive.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice President.
So Patrick, is part of that our inability to be nimble, to be able to make rapid changes and adjustments? Or is it, so in other words, everybody's chasing the high valuation right now, with the idea that every day you better be ready to push the sell button when this thing starts to correct.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that is an instance where we do have, especially in private equity and some of these other instances where a fund will just open up and we have to get approval to do so. In the hedge fund component, we don't, because it's managed under the Grosvenor umbrella. And so Matt Smagash, who runs this, has the ability to change around and has changed around a significant amount of this. But no, that is not, this area has nothing to do with the liquid nature of our investments.
Yeah, as I understood what you said, you're saying that we're giving up upside because we think the upside is limited. What we're doing to do is position to protect the downside and actually benefit when the market comes back, when the market swings back.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And in fact, if we didn't have that big loss, if you look up above in the equity with Van Berkom, they lost 36 million versus the index. So these are all obviously you want to look at net of performance, but 36 million is a big chunk. But they're a fabulous value manager, and small cap stocks, the bottom 20 percentile of, the worst of the stock have rallied over 100%. So the bottom 20 have just screamed and done extremely well. Any type of normalization or a sell-off, Van Berkom will do very well. So it's not an instance of where we're looking at the manager and going, oh God, what are they doing? We know exactly what they're doing. If you look at their stock portfolio, how many have beat their earnings? It's like 90% of them have beat their earnings. It's nothing to do with the manager. It's in relation of where we are. Very little to do with the manager. It's in relation. So we're very comfortable with where we are. It's just we're not willing to play this game of musical chairs and be sitting there without a chair when the music stops.
Chasing high price stocks.
No, we're not going to do that. Real estate. UBS is one of the managers that we're trying to liquidate, but we're not able to get out of that fund. That's one of the issues of liquidity. Real estate is an illiquid investment, so you're not able to move around in any meaningful way. And fixed income is we're up 20 million on the fixed income side. The one I want to point out, a new fund that the IFC and SLIB have allowed us to do is what's called an opportunistic fund. And we just had the numbers there, so I was not able to portray that. But what we are able to do is to take up to 5% of the fund and invest it into opportunities that could be very, very short-lived. You don't have that opportunity to get in and do things. So for instance, I got a call, it was over a President's Day weekend. It was Saturday afternoon. They said, we have an investment and we have to know the answer by Monday. So Sunday afternoon, we got the team together. We looked over it. Monday, we did due diligence to work on it. And we submitted an amount for that allocation that Monday evening. These are things that with the structure and what's happening with the treasurer's guidance, with the IFC, and the SLIB's ability to do this is a new way for us to be more nimble and be able to access some of these opportunities that normally most funds are not able to. So in answering the senator's question on this one is a better opportunity. So far, we have made 5 investments. In that, we have about 103 million in total investments so far. Current year-to-date alpha is 32 million. So it's by far one of the best investments. We're 50 some basis points or 50 some percent over our index in this category. So this one has done very well. Knock on wood, because you don't know. You don't count your money when it's sitting at the table, right?
Guaranteed future.
Exactly. So for instance, Instacart, was during the COVID, that was one of our first investments because of the changes. So that was an opportunity that is done. It's up three times, 2.5 times. Healthcare, we did a healthcare investment. Anyway, that would be another 32 additional onto our 54. So right now we are sitting approximately 86 million above our benchmark in alpha attribution. Any question on that before I go to fees? Because there is this committee, over the years, we've talked about the fees, and I do want to comment with all of these changes, what will happen to our fee structure. And that is going to be the last page on page 10. So as you remember from 2016, we did the savings in fees to build out the investments and so forth, which was, I think, a wonderful strategy that we did. But now, just looking at it, we've talked about how our fees are extremely low, but the fees will be changing with this asset allocation change. So if you remember our asset allocation changes that we had, the biggest change that we're going to be doing is we're taking money out of our core bond funds and we're putting them into the more private credit, infrastructure, private equity funds. Those fees are significantly higher than what we're doing. So the funds that we manage, obviously there's a 0 basis point management fee there. The core bond funds, they average about 10 or 12 basis points, which is by far the lowest of all of the fees that we manage. And we're going into private credit, private equity infrastructure that average anywhere from 75 to 2% in management fees. Now, net effect, we're going to be getting a better yield and so forth, but the fees that we're looking at will go up significantly over this time. And so I just want to make sure that all of you are aware that we've talked about this, about the low fee structure that we have, but now by changing the portfolio allocation so dramatically, it will impact that fee structure.
Right. If we kept ourselves in passive index funds, we could keep it down. But if we want to search for these higher returns, you're going to go pay professionals to go do this. And this is not, these fee increases, as I understood it, are not within your office. These are largely to the money managers we're going to place this money with and what they charge to run that brokerage.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Investment. Okay. Thank you.
And what's the timing on that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that will be up to 5 years is the timing that we have, and how quickly we can get as you know, the private markets are going to be much more difficult to get invested, but it will take a significant amount of time. But once fully implemented, our fee structure will go up.
What's our return?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, well, let's take PMTF as an example in the income fund. So with this asset allocation, our returns will go up 71 basis points. So we're 71 on 9, that's $63 million per year additional income just in the PMTF, if the forecasted numbers are correct. But because you wouldn't do that 71 on the 23 billion, because you would take, we could look at each one of the funds, but you're 4.5 on common school. So you're talking about another 30 odd million there. You could go through each fund on it and see, because the difference, because common school is more income focused, it won't have as high of a fee than the PMTF in general.
Okay. Keep going.
That is the last points that we had, I believe, and I'm under 11 o'clock almost, 2 minutes. One last comment, I just want to comment a little bit on that OMS. And I do just want to mention all of the hard work that the treasurer and especially Don has worked on this OMS, or order management system. Just so you know, my first OMS was in 1993. That's when OMS came out. And we are so antiquated that here we are, 27 years later, and we still are writing tickets by hand. The amount of error potential that we could have and have had is great, because you have to go back in and change them and everything else. Now, because we've always done bonds. So I do a ticket, I print it out, write it out, initialize it, send it off. They take it, put all the information, send it to the back office, they input it. They go to the dealing broker, go to our custodian, JP Morgan. It's ridiculous. Now that we're doing internal trading of equities, this week we just started, but the first batch of equities was 350. What S&P 500 is our index, so we bought 350. All of those have to come through Excel spreadsheets, go across, put forth. So I just want to mention how important this is. And the fee on it is you either do AUM based, which we're not doing because it's 23 billion, but if you do transaction based, which we're only trading very frequently in bonds, infrequently in bonds, and then quarterly and monthly, it's a lower level. So that's set in stone, those costs. It's not like somebody could come in and come up with some outlandish number. And the only one that you really care about on this, the interface with Clearwater and things like that, it doesn't happen per se on the ordering. Once it goes into JP Morgan and they have that security, then it changes. But the big part is JP Morgan, the dealing broker, and us.
So the order management system actually runs through JP Morgan as the settling bank?
Correct. And so
Okay,
that's
and
why
so-
those three parties are the Goldman Sachs as an
All right,
example.
so
JP Morgan.
So that we don't, so we're not worried about interface between that and the back office because it goes through JP Morgan. It's the interface with JP Morgan on both ends.
Yeah, because
Simple.
JP Morgan is looking at Goldman Sachs as the seller and they're looking at State of Wyoming as the buyer. And you have to go through and match those securities. So when you don't have electronically and you're doing it physically, it's just an accident waiting to happen. But I just want to highlight all of the hard work because we started working on this in 2016 or whatever, and we weren't able to get the funds to be able to do it. But I just want to tell you, all the hard work that Don Williams and the treasurer has done to be able to save the money in other parts of the budget to allow us to do this. It's going to make Katie's job and my job 10 times easier. So I just wanted to comment and publicly thank them for all the hard work of what they've done.
What about Lisa's job?
Lisa gets to govern all of the trading and make sure none of us none of us do any trading on those trading days when we're
Hopefully
trading.
it'll improve compliance as she's our de facto compliance officer. So
Not de facto, full on.
Full on,
Yeah,
okay.
she's not de facto. She's
All right.
doing a great job.
great. She's back. Okay. Anyway, we took your name in vain, Lisa. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for our CIO? Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Let's see, we are. Okay, yeah, why don't we take a quick 5-minute break? I'm sure most of you are long past that need for that. So why don't we take a 5-minute break and we'll come back here we'll come back in at 11:10. So it's really an 8-minute break. we'll go ahead and we'll,
Hey, you guys open that, we're gonna have a meeting today.
yeah. Yeah, it sounded like it was a spirited debate. So anyway, we'll go ahead and we'll call ourselves back to order. And with that, we're now on item number 5, Investment Funds Committee. Mr. Treasurer, we've got you, and I think we have, my understanding is we have a few IFC members that are on the Zoom with us as well today.
Yeah, so I think Ken Lay was going to be here. I don't know whether Tom Chapman made it or not.
Mr. Chairman, we have Ken Lay and Russell Reed.
Oh, and Russell, great.
Great. Let's
Great.
go ahead and admit
Okay.
them, please.
Tom said he could make it if it was right at 11 because he had a 12 o'clock.
All right, there's Mr. Lay. Hello, Ken. And there's
Ken.
Mr. Reed.
Hey,
Hello,
Russell.
Russell. All right, go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman, I guess you guys wanted to talk a bit about the IFC letter dated December 10th. I guess from my perspective and talking with Vice Chairman Chapman a bit, that's kind of history. We're moving on to 244. A lot of the stuff that's in 244 was in the letter. I think we'll have some good discussions in an interim when we work over 244 that will either corroborate or I guess enforce some of our assertions in the letter. And or they won't, we'll let the facts fall where they may. But I would say if Russell or Ken want to say anything, or you guys want to query them on anything, I'd turn the floor over to them at this point in time. I don't know if, but I would say that what we're looking at on 244, what our staff has done, just because Russell and Ken, I don't think have had the opportunity on a lot of this, is that we've been working with RBK and Josh to develop a line of questions on a survey that we would send out. Oh, hi, Tom. Send out to the different, I guess, investment operations across the country and ask them a lot of different questions. One was, I'll just go through the areas of focus that we've developed in. And when we get into the IFC meeting, there's maybe some other areas of focus that we want to develop on that survey. Their risk profile, who establishes the risk parameters, strategic asset allocation, who ultimately owns a strategic asset allocation, the budget, how's the budget established and how independent it is for things like procurement and human resources, who is independent and who's hiring and firing and the managers. Accountability, how is poor performance handled, who is accountable and through what mechanisms. Reporting and transparency, what reporting and transparency is required and provided to the stakeholders. Oversight, what public or elected oversight of the investment program exists or doesn't exist. Constraints, what legal constraints, that's constitutional, legislative, impact the operation investment. Sovereign immunity, do they have sovereign immunity? And that also includes taxes. Do they pay taxes? Kind of find out what the greatest benefits and successes of moving to an autonomous or semi-autonomous structure may offer. Obstacles, what have been the largest challenge or associated with structure. Transition, how long did the transition take? And historical performance, which is maybe the most important because the legislature contemplates in the statute here that that will achieve the best long-term results to the state, taking into account legal risk, spending requirements, volatile revenue characteristics, accuracy, transparency, timeliness, and efficiency. So that's where we're kind of headed towards so far. And in our office is developing that type of a survey. We're trying to get it past anecdotal, get it objective, not subjective. I think we all have good stories. I don't think there's too many nightmares in different cases, but that's kind of where we're headed right now as far as what we've got teed up for the IFC to talk about in our next meeting. But with that, Mr. Chairman, we've got three members now. So if you could each give them some time to opine on either the letter or 244.
Mr. Chairman?
Sure, go ahead, Mr.
Yeah.
Vice Chairman.
Before we do that, Kurt, I'm curious about the survey. When do you plan to send it out? Are you going to have the IFC review the questions and perhaps assist in who it was going to be sent to? And just fill us in a little bit more
Well,
about it.
we're working with RVK primarily and somewhat with Makita as far as their mailing list. And so I think we're going to have a fairly broad sampling there. There was an outfit, if you recall, the Funston report. We're going to try to get a hold of them and see what mailing lists they might have. So we get a fairly overall comprehensive report back from the different type of investment operations, and that are out there, and try to find out who is actually responsible for what in those areas. And so we can kind of correlate the returns back to the risk and try to find out who actually makes those decisions and who the decisions makers are in the, in the two biggest areas. And that's, asset allocation is your very biggest, and the risk drives your asset allocation. So we need to find out in those different organizations, whether they're autonomous or not, who actually makes those decisions, get an idea about what their standard deviation is in relationship to their return. Because necessarily if you have a public and a private investment set up, and they both have the same standard deviation, and one is getting substantially higher returns, then you can actually say, well, yeah, there's a reason for that, and it might be governance. If you have the case where all the private ones are substantially higher in standard deviation or the risk, then we need to look at it and say, well, that's probably the reason why their asset allocation is quite different. If you look at some of the long-term endowments and some of the long-term investment, I guess the more semi-autonomous or autonomous type of ones, they've been around long enough that they've implemented asset allocations along the lines that we're just starting to dabble in, to, I guess, pull up the Yale endowment, and you can kind of see what they're into. They were into 30 years ago about what we are in today. Now they've got probably 25% in venture capital, which essentially we couldn't even begin to address that. I don't think we have the risk profile, nor do we have access to the top venture capital firms as those early endowments do. So, there are some obstacles that we need to look at as far as implementation, how long it will take, what's really the definition of a long-term aspect. I think that we want to look out, try to get the ability in the structure, in the budgeting and in the other processes where if we're going to have a 5 or 10-year plan or a longer plan, that we have the ability to actually implement that without a lot of, unnecessary interference. And that's something that I think would be a long-term growth aspect, which I would hope would be a goal of the committee that we're looking out in that long of a timeframe. But I think what we're going to get out of this survey is we're going to get a lot more facts and a lot of those questions about how long is long and what we should be looking at it'll be more objective rather than subjective. So I guess from that standpoint, that's where I kind of where we're at as far as trying to make it as broad of a survey as we can. Trying to do it as for $10,000, that's not a lot of survey. You can't get a lot for your money when we're dealing. So we may be back in for a bump in that when we find out what the cost is to actually determine the facts on some of these questions.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So are we ready to, you want us to go ahead and invite our IFC members?
Mr. Chairman.
So why don't we go ahead? So we'll let you argue among yourselves about who gets to go first, second, and third.
I think
Right
that,
now, it looks like a first and a second. One of them is either that or he's.
I know Tom has a drop dead.
Let's go ahead.
At 12. So.
Okay, so Tom, we'll go ahead and go to you. Thank you first of all, thank you for taking a few minutes of your time today. What I'd like to do is just hear any additional comments you would have in addition to the letter that you sent out on December the 10th, as well as kind of how you see or any ideas or comments you'd have about the study that you were asked to do in House Bill 244. And so with that, Tom, we'll turn over to you. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Tom Chapman, Vice Chair of the Investment Funds Committee. As the treasurer outlined, this is unfortunate on timing because we have our meeting here in 2 days with the IFC. So, we're hopeful that we're going to get a bit more organization and how we're going to tackle this endeavor in 2 days. But I think I think many of you have heard me say before, I think this is an exciting time for the Treasury Investment Program. I mean, given that the state's, conservative view since the 1800s of the railroads, right, in 1996, then investing in equities, we've made a lot of progress in the last, say, 20 years. When you look at the investment team growing, the CIO, the IFC, in terms of our asset allocations and complexities. So, House Bill 244 is certainly a logical step for us to really try to become, a best of breed sovereign wealth program. I guess given that we all probably have our own opinions on the IFC, which is really one of the great things about it, I can certainly probably only speak for myself. But the one thing I do want to say maybe as vice chair is the thing that we all agree on is we do want to be a top tier sovereign wealth fund. And in terms of agreements on how do we get there, we really do need to look at the organization and management structure, whether it's a separate management co, whether it's an agency like group. We also need to look at, as I know RVK has talked about a lot, is the revenue and expense model that's really adequate to support our staffing and technology needs for best results. We really too need to understand the state's oversight role as an owner of the investment operations. One of the things that I think is great about this process is, we have members of the SLIB, we have members of the legislature, and we also have independent participation. And it's going to be really important that all of us together agree with, there are plenty of great programs out there, but one of the issues is they might not necessarily be totally right for Wyoming. And so we need to discuss and figure out which parts of that make the most sense. And so to me, Mr. Chairman, the key element on this is to have almost a layered process of how do we come to an agreement with the parties, i.e. the SLIB and the legislature, on what do we think from a governance standpoint, what do we think from an operations standpoint that make the most sense for Wyoming. And I think the treasurer's idea of a survey is a really great start as far as the ability to see what best of breed programs are doing today. So I don't have much more to say. I'm happy to talk further on questions on the letter from December 10th, but those are sort of my initial thoughts on this process. And again, want to thank you all for taking this on. I think it's going to be great for the state of Wyoming.
Tom, and thank you for your service. We appreciate you and Russell and Ken and the other members of the IFC and the work that you do. I know you must do it because you love Wyoming. I know it's not because of the money. So we do appreciate that. Tom, I know that you've got a short time frame. If you have any comments that you would like, anything you'd like to expand on in the letter that you wrote, please go ahead and do that at this point in time. We'd sure want to make sure we hear your comments before you have to run.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I actually don't have that. I'm fine for the length of the of this. I moved my 12 o'clock.
Okay.
So again, consistent with my love for Wyoming.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you. So Tom, why don't you, if you don't mind, just introduce yourself to because there's a lot of folks here who don't know your background. So tell us a little about you and what you do on the IFC, because we've got new folks here who they're really not familiar with it. So I think that would be useful for us to get a little bit more background.
Sure. Thank you, Representative Nicholas. So my background is I'm a recovering hedge fund addict. I started my career working for a macro hedge fund in London in the early 90s during the EU convergence and was a derivatives trader. I then moved on to an equity long short hedge fund called Tiger Management, which is one of the more famous hedge funds out there. I then went and worked for a private equity group in Asia and started their Asia practice in distressed investing during the Asia crisis. And then basically came back to Wyoming in the early 2000s to run a multifamily office, investment office. And that's what I do today. And so with regards to the Investment Funds Committee, I'm the vice chair and clearly have been pushing for trying to get us to, I guess, to become more institutionalized relative to our peers. And there's no reason why the state of Wyoming can't be as good, if not better, than so many of our peer groups, whether in the States or internationally. So Representative Nicholas, I'm not sure, do you want me to, what else would you like me to say?
Well, when was the last time you climbed the Grand?
Yeah, well, I guess I do a lot of climbing in the Tetons. I'm still hoping to someday when I drive to Buffalo to climb Cloud Peak in the Bighorns. But I love the outdoors in Jackson. My family, we've been in Jackson for a long time and have been involved in businesses in Jackson. And as I say, I grew up working. We had a ranch in the 80s where we used to take cows up to the mountains through the Moultons, through the Turners up at Triangle X. And, I guess maybe unfortunately I still remember about this time of year when we would be taking the cows up and the homesick calves would hit pavement and then take off and go head back to the barn. And if your cow horse was good, you basically had to learn how to ride pretty fast because you're going to fall off.
Thank you. Anyway, thank you. So we'll go ahead and either Ken or Russell, either one of you guys want to take your turn?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll come in, but I'm only going to come in very briefly because I've had a chance to discuss all of this with Tom and with the treasurer beforehand. But I'm very much looking forward to the study that we're undertaking here. I think that it was exactly the right time for this because, as Tom had indicated, I think the state has made a tremendous amount of progress over the past several years. And I think now to undertake a comprehensive review of what has been best practice in the sovereign wealth fund management is going to enable us to move forward, really effectively now over the into the interim and then going forward. So I don't really have a great deal to add to what Tom had said about all of this. We've got our meeting on Friday, and I'm looking forward to that to pull together the terms of reference for the study that we're going to be doing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ken. Russell?
So great to see everyone here today. I underscore that Tom, I think, described where we are, I think, very well. We're very supportive of the study. And I just want to leave you with a couple of concepts to think about in terms of prevailing best practice that I've seen among the most effective sovereign wealth funds in the U.S. and globally. And I hope they'll be sort of helpful as the committee sort of progresses over time. But the two very useful constructs that I've seen is one is viewing your sovereign funds as and the people who are managing it, viewing it as a profit center. It's a and what I mean by that is that there's a different sort of view that you'll have if you think of the sovereign funds and the management of the sovereign funds as a profit center to the state rather than a cost center. Cost centers can be very important. You think of education, other things, but you manage a profit center differently. With a profit center, for instance, it's all about getting, you want it to be as maximally productive as possible. It's giving you a resource. The better it's managed, the more effective we are at managing the funds, the more of a resource that the state of Wyoming has, not just now, but for decades to come. And that concept of a profit center has led to the logic of it is what's led to sort of a different governance. I would say different governance, sometimes different legal structures, potentially state-owned enterprise. But I think in terms of best practice standards, the more that the legislature can sort of view the sovereign funds as a profit center operationally. The better it can be. So that's one lesson that I've sort of learned in my time with sovereign funds. And then the other is really a perspective of looking at risk, not in terms of what we're investing in individualistic terms, but viewing it in terms of a portfolio. When you look at a portfolio, an investment portfolio, what you want to look at is, what's the return that we're getting, perspective or historical returns on the amount of risk that we're undertaking. And that's a portfolio concept. And in many ways, what might be sort of comforting, but potentially surprising to a lot of folks is that if I'm looking at the history, let's take another fund of the permanent fund, the Alaska Permanent Fund, where I was chief investment officer for a number of years. we had at the permanent fund, which is considered one of the better managed sovereign wealth funds at this point, very competitive returns compared to peers. But we had about a 35-year period of underperformance, third and fourth quartile performance. And it was that we systematically had been taking not enough portfolio risk. It was a very low risk portfolio. And because of that, over a period of 35 years, we actually gave up, compared to if we had just done as well as our peers, we would have, we gave up somewhere between $15 to $20 billion of foregone returns. So it's there's a point to it, which is getting efficiently compensated for your investment returns over time ends up being a fairly big deal. You know, that $15 to $20 billion is something that would have been very helpful. You know, even though in any one year, you know, it wouldn't seem like a big deal. Over a period of time, it added up, you know, to a very significant deal. And that was, we had smart people. We had smart people from a policy perspective. We had smart investors, but we were systematicly underperforming for a period of decades. And now that's been changed, and that but the real life consequences of that are that it actually becomes a major factor, you know, in what your resource will be for the spending of the state of Wyoming. So those are just two things I wanted to add in terms of context, but overall, I think Tom stated, you know, what the IFC as support is for the bill, and our optimism for the legislature taking a very constructive approach, you know, to the sovereign wealth funds. I too share the optimism that and my experience is that getting this right is actually a big deal in terms of state terms. That was my experience in the state of Alaska, and I think we can do at least as good of a job here in Wyoming.
So, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chairman.
So thank you. I appreciate that, Ken and Tom and Russell. A couple of things I just want to mention to you. If you look at 244, it gives the IFC a significant amount of leeway in this report that you're going to put together. And that was intentionally drafted that way because in some ways we don't know what the right questions are to ask. We're an uneducated lot in terms of how sovereign wealth funds are managed. And so we hope that you'll take advantage of that in any way you feel that you need to. The next component of it allows you to have access to, if you, as much as you need, the Legislative Service Office, and in particular our fiscal group, who puts together our budget, who manages and oversees the funds from the Treasurer's Office, and can help you in any way that you may need help into understanding how that our 20-odd billion is invested in the different funds, because you've got the permanent funds, you've got the non-permanent funds, and a lot of those have different frameworks and different goals and objectives. And so the monies are invested differently. But as much as you need to understand that and to get your arms around it, as you put your report together, basically we want to be at your beck and call to be of the greatest assistance as we can to you as you move forward. And obviously kind of as we collaborate, as we move forward, we want to help you. We don't want you to be overly redundant. If you need some ground sleuthing in any shape or form, or drafting assistance, all that, we basically want to make it as easy for you as possible to move this forward. I know, Tom, that you've put in a considerable amount of work doing some homework for your December 10th, 2020 letter that you provided to us. And thank you very much for all that help. And hopefully that will help kind of pave the way for this, for as we move over to these next steps. But yeah, we just want to be at your convenience and just be as helpful as we can for you guys to help us. So thanks a lot.
So, thank you for that. As we went back and looked at the letter that the IFC wrote back to the working group, I just thought it was kind of interesting and to some degree, I would be curious in your thoughts about, as you look at the study, if you go through the questions you ask, you kind of put it into three categories: spending policies, governance, and I think I can't remember the third one, tools. And so, as we go back and look at that, I just interested. I mean, as you look forward at this study, it would seem to me that a lot of these are going to fall back into those three areas that you kind of addressed in your letter. And it's going to be a deeper dive. Do you kind of see it that way, or what do you see?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I think that, what we were trying to do in December was maybe be a little more pointed with the questions that were asked. And I would think that the report for the summer is going to be more encompassing, frankly. But I do think that one of the challenges will be, when we talk about spending, I feel like this is where, we are going to have to talk with you all as CapFin to really understand that, because there are definitely a lot of nuances with, a particular state, with Wyoming, that we're going to have to work with to really make, I feel like, the best recommendation that we can that really is more tailored to the state.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Tom was saying, I think when you look at these different areas, I think it's very important for the legislature, for decision makers in the legislature, and of course SLIB and everything, to have some realistic assessment of what are the opportunity costs of some of the existing practices and the existing approaches. Okay, so that you can actually say, okay, yes, we've been doing this way for 75 or 100 years or whatever, and now let's take a look. Russell was just indicating what they had discovered when he looked at the 35 years of experience in Alaska, and I think it's very important for the legislature and actually members of the public to understand what are the costs and benefits of these different approaches, because otherwise it can be quite easy to stick with existing practice unless you have had the costs and benefits of that clearly articulated. So I think one of the key things that we'll be trying to accomplish with this study is to give all of that some visibility as a foundation for assessing the different options that are available in each of the areas that the December letter identified, and others that may come up. But I think there is a tremendous pool of information about that we can draw on.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ken. Go ahead, Mr. Vice President.
Yeah, so Mr. President, this question would be for Ken and Russell, and it gets back to the discussion on opportunity costs. And so Russell, in the example that you give, it's easy to calculate opportunity costs when we look backwards because we know what we received and we know what the markets did. So how do you then look at, Ken, back to your statement, look at what those lost opportunity costs are going forward, because this is what we have to sell on the floor. to the rest of the legislature and the people of the state of Wyoming. And so how do we calculate opportunity cost within the context of the discussions that we had earlier with the volatility that we have in the markets, projecting forward, and how far out there do you project? And then what's the reliability of the projection? And we all know you get out 10 years, it's probably not as accurate as 2 years. But at the end of the day, that's the $10,000 question that we have to sell is if we go down this road with higher risk investments based on the opportunity cost, how are we going to go out and calculate that to have some semblance that we might actually be accurate? So could you guys address that?
If I can give my perspective, this is Russell.
Go ahead, Russell. Go ahead.
The metric, which I think has been helpful that I've seen, that I believe in is one of the investment efficiency. You know, the interesting thing is taking more risk doesn't actually necessarily give you a better sovereign wealth fund. The concept of efficiency for investments is, are you being paid for the risks that you're undertaking? So this is a very helpful construct. It's a lens by which we can view things historically, and it's a lens by which we can view things prospectively as well. You know, and namely, we can also benchmark. We can also benchmark what our plans are versus other sovereign funds managed in the U.S. and globally. So with that perspective, the criteria then is looking at have we been and are we on track to be compensated for the risk that we're undertaking in aggregate? There's a specific measure of that, by the way, which is called a Sharpe ratio, named after Bill Sharpe, the Nobel Prize winner. But it's a simple measure, which on a portfolio basis and on an asset class basis, which provides a standard by which we generally assess, whether we are, how well we're being compensated for the risk we're undertaking. So I think one, we can look at what are comparable levels of risk that are being undertaken by other funds, and then two, we can get a sense of how we're doing, in terms of being compensated for that risk, and in general, what's the role of the investment office? Patrick and investment team, their mission is to, if they do an excellent job, is to be efficient with their investing, namely to earn the best possible investment return for the amount of risk that they're undertaking. And our job, in part from a policy perspective, is to help them, achieve that objective, that efficiency objective, and also to set, a portfolio level of risk that's appropriate for each of the for each of the particular funds, whether they're a permanent fund or whether they are a cash reserve fund, or depending on what their functions are. So we have some good news that there's a context that we can look at. Our consultant RVK in particular can be extremely helpful in providing benchmarks of what other states and what other sovereign funds are doing globally. So I think the investment efficiency concept is how we square how well we are doing from a design perspective and from an execution perspective with our funds.
Thank you, Russell. We got another question. Who's that?
Did Ken want to weigh in on that?
Okay, Ken, did you have something you wanted to add on that concept?
Mr. Chairman, if I just I think to come back to the question about, yes, looking forward, I think there's no doubt you cannot, yes, the backward look only has a limited value, and most normal humans get that. And I think the important thing but I also think that it's possible. There's ways to model outcomes And so that you can say, look, there may be a number of different scenarios. You can't predict all of them, but it's possible to indicate if this kind of scenario unfolds, yes, the risk that we're taking is going to imply a significant loss. So get used to it. And I mention this only because there was an interesting experience when Norway was going through this same process during the noughts, and they were the issue of communication with what in Norway is called the Storting, the legislature, and with members of the public as they began to diversify their investments and everything. It was a major effort to communicate, I think, to the public generally what this expectation was. And interestingly, I was on their advisory committee at the time, and the fellow who was the chief investment officer spent a significant amount of his time in that communication process. And interestingly, when they rolled into the 2008 crisis, the fund lost 20-something%. But because there had been what I would call a very plain English discussion in advance about what the expectations could be, the public was, they understood that. And I think that, and that, of course, I think is an underpinning for to create the foundation for the kind of, I'd call it best practice sovereign wealth fund management that we're all looking to accomplish. But it can't be done without effective communication with members of the public and members of the legislature. I'm probably restating the obvious, but anyway, that was the thought I had.
Thank you, Ken. Let's go to Senator Group.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too, agree with the co-chair. I think the studies, in 244 is one of the keys to this, and then the companion on 121, the 2-year study that we're going to embark in. But something that Russell said that kind of piqued my interest, I want to hear or hope to hear more about as you go through this process. I agree totally. A profit center, looking at this as a profit center instead of a cost center, it's really tough for government to do that. And I know with your experience in Alaska, that and communicating that across and getting frankly us to that point as a legislative body, I think is going to be key. Can you speak more to that, or what you've seen from your experience, or some things that we should be looking at as touchstones as we go forward?
Absolutely. And it's, I mentioned the profit center piece because I think this is it's one of the more important, but also it's one of the least intuitive, I think, parts of the evolution for sovereign funds. And there's some different governance. There's not one best practice standard for instance, for governance. There are definitely some choices. However, what we have seen is the rise of, when we think of the very best managed and best regarded sovereign funds globally, they generally have they've taken a form of what we call an SOE, a state-owned enterprise. They clearly have to be owned by the state. If they lose, there's, but the governance and even that we're seeing, right now, the wonderful confidence and questions that we have for the IFC. Our reflection also of something, different, is bringing in some perspectives more broadly from investment industry folks. But what I saw is that if you had a blank sheet of paper, what you would like to do is you would like to be able to view the sovereign, an entity that's managing the sovereign funds in terms of almost like a a state-owned investment management company. And how would that work? What you're interested in terms of success is you would like to have this investment management company be as effective as possible in terms of delivering returns based on the risk that they're undertaking. Each fund, of course, should have a different level of risk because they have a different function in state, for state government, which is also good. But for the risk that they're undertaking, you want them to be delivering a competitive level of return. How large should that state-owned enterprise be? How many employees should there be? How much should they pay in terms of fees? Well, that's also a function, I think, of the effectiveness, in which they're investing. We know, for instance, it can be a very slimmed down effort. They could be largely indexing their returns in public markets. For them to expand into the private markets, which has become a measure, that has been an important evolution in best practice. So I'm legging into the private markets, that there is an illiquidity premium that is expected, not always delivered, but expected when you invest in the private markets. And that generally requires more people, either internally or externally. So the way I look at the logic around how you're viewing this profit center becomes a little different. It's all, the size of the enterprise, the number of people, the amount of fees that you pay internally and externally, is a function of, are we being paid for what the fees that we're undertaking? So if it were just a cost center, for instance, you just look at the amount of fees that you're paying. But if it's a profit center, it's not about the amount of fees that you're paying. It's how much return are we getting for the fees that we're undertaking? And that's a very productive way of kind of viewing, what is essentially a state-owned enterprise, so should be a state-owned enterprise, or the equivalent of one if it remains, within not as a separate state-owned enterprise, but as something that's part of state government. In the permanent fund, the Alaska Permanent Fund, we sort of did a halfway solution, which, there are pros and cons of that, which is we created a separate legal entity called the Alaska Permanent Fund Corporation. So that essentially created a state-owned enterprise, except it was a state-owned enterprise without a revenue line. So it would have been completed if there was sort of some imputed, let's say, basis point, you manage this and there's an allocation of a certain number of basis points based on assets under management for your operations and expenses that you pay outside managers. We never completed the profit part or the revenue piece. So it was just a cost, it still was just a cost center and under the Department of Revenue. But there was the creation of a separate entity. And so we kind of got to, in the Alaska Permanent Fund case, it was we sort of halfway got to a state-owned enterprise. It was more fully, state-owned enterprises have been created for sovereign funds more fully in the case of certain Canadian funds and in funds in the Middle East, Singapore, and other locations.
Thank you. Other questions for members of the ISC? We've got them here. Mr. Treasurer, did you want to weigh in? And I had one other comment, if you want to, one other question that you and the members of the IFC could weigh in as well. I appreciate the conversation about being a profit center, and I was thinking the state of Wyoming has at least one other profit center I could think of, which is the liquor division, and I don't know how much interplay there is between the liquor division and the. But as we think about this, and as our consideration on whether it's if it's truly a profit center is. One of the consideration is interesting is the current operations and funds to help fund or run government. And the other one is intergenerational equity and how we deal with those two, because ultimately the profits that come out of there have to satisfy, have to satisfy both of those those requirements as well as the requirement for preservation of assets. So as you make your comments, I've been interested in your thoughts about that as well. Thank you. So Mr. Chairman, I'll go back to Mr. Secretary, we'll go to you first.
Oh, okay. Mr. Treasurer, I was looking for the secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, just to comment on the profit center aspect, Russell and I have had that discussion before, and it got me thinking a little bit differently, I think, in aspects. That's why when I was talking about the fees that were going to be associated with her added risk, that don't think about that, think about the returns that we're getting out of it, because net of fees, we're much better off. And to the point of not getting all the way there in Alaska, an anecdotal thing, when we were at the Sovereign Wealth Fund, I guess the conference up in Juneau, there, the current head there, Angela, was telling us the story that within 5 days, she was going to have to basically lock the doors of the Alaska Fund, because the legislature and the governor couldn't get together to decide whether or not they're going to have the funds available so she could pay her employees. So it's really important, I would say, to move this process to where we move all the way. We don't go halfway on some of these things, when it comes to the funding and the HR and the procurement. Undoubtedly, we still have to have guardrails or some guidance. I believe it can't be a runaway situation, but I think that we can achieve that from the basis point aspect that Russell talked about. And I think that's going to be part of our study. And I think that when we look at the spending part of it and stuff that was in the letter, I think that's more appropriate in the area of comment on the bill that I think you guys have. Is it which one is it? Is that 121? That's the next one up, because we're be talking about spending policy and those things there. So I think you're going to get all that information. It may not be necessarily within a 244 report, but I think that we can do, an internal study on 121 without, us having to have a bill that tells us if you guys want us to, basically tackle that aspect of the process too.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer, and I was thinking of Secretary of the Treasury, but anyway, that's a different government.
Okay.
Anyway, so as we think about that, I think one of the issues is we recognize the investment function and its related functions within your office as one, but the other side of it is, this isn't the only function that your office does. And so, this, as we think about that, I don't know that this necessarily applies to every function in your office. I think it certainly has a lot of validity in talking about the investment function and accounting for the investment function, but your office does a number of other things. And so, it's your office has a good chance that at the end of the day, it may be bifurcated, as I kind of think about our discussion today. But anyway, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, it's a little early to look at, I think, my wish list. I want to get the facts out there, through the study process. I think that efficiently, to be more efficient, I think it would be, problematic to actually to stand up two different offices, because you're going to have a lot of trouble figuring out where legal goes. We got a great legal team. We got a great team there in that area. We got a good IT team. There's a lot of things that you'd lose a lot of efficiency in people if it was outside of, if this enterprise was outside of our office. I think it could locate necessarily within our office without any loss of efficiency or functionality.
I get that, but I mean, if we go back to Russell's comments about, ultimately they ended up setting up this whole thing in a separate state-owned entity or state-owned corporation. And that was, I think if I understood Russell right, that was in the Department of Revenue.
Right.
And so, but the whole Department of Revenue didn't move into the Alaskan, whatever it was, corporation, Alaskan Investment Corporation. I mean, so it ended up being bifurcated. It was independent and had all those things, but didn't apply to the entire Department of Revenue. So I think, and I don't know how the answer is, but I just, those were thoughts I had as I was listening to the discussion.
Yeah, I think it can be bifurcated, but you can share resources that necessarily give you greater efficiencies within the office where it's located now. So, that's where I think that the dollars and cents will probably lead in the efficiencies, will probably lead in effectiveness also. But what we're waiting for really is to go out, get the survey, find out, what the where the best return is, in those situations, and find out where, the big questions are really who does the asset allocation and establishes the risk, because that's where 95% of your returns are. We're really talking about in the governance structure about, less than 5% of what actually, adds to the bottom line. Frankly, it's all important. It all has to function correctly. But at the end of the day, those questions about, I think that where the asset allocations are determined and where the risk is determined, in the most successful enterprises, that's far more important as to rather where the governance structure is located. It's just the dollars and cents of it.
Yeah, well, right now we're just at the beginning, we're not at the end. So
yeah.
And some of it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem. Some of this stuff has to happen, and how it happens and which goes first, we'll all see how it works out.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other comments or questions for our members of the ISC before we would love that. They're welcome to stay as long as they can, but I'm assuming these are busy men with busy schedules. Mr. Vice Chairman.
I did want to mention that in terms of, I was just looking at the agenda for the IFC on Friday. And if the IFC would be interested, we could have Don Richards available just to kind of give you a rough outline of the various funds and how they're invested. 10 or 20 minute, just brief explanation to kind of lay the groundwork for you. If you're interested in it. I've talked to him and he would be available if you want that. And he's kind of our guru on the Legislative Service Office on our fiscal side. So, but I just want you to know that he's at your disposal, and Kurt, so that just so you can, as you begin to formulate your ideas and concepts, however we can help. But if that would be useful, just let us know.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I did talk to Don while he was in here, and really kind of the way that the IFC members like to try to get their information is if we can send it to them, so they can read it, and you read a report, and then the presentation for, informational purposes would be probably a lot condensed. These guys are voracious readers, and when I suggest that we have something that's going to be putting on something, they really want to try to just do action items for the most part. And if it's informational, try to get the information out to them, as soon as possible. So I'm assuming we're probably going to have a lot more than just our quarterly meetings with the IFC in this area. So, I welcome the input, but we have Matt Sackett as a resource. If Don could talk to Matt, I think that they could probably get something out to the IFC members, and then if it's necessary to do a slide presentation or something like that to actually cement it, into the minds of our folks, and I think that's probably the way to do it.
Thank you. Thank you. Russell or Ken or Tom, anything else for us? Russell or Ken or Tom, anything else for us?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to say welcome to the Investment Funds Committee.
Thank you, sir. May I have another? Thanks so much. Appreciate your time and appreciate your information. Look forward to working with you over the next year or so while we continue to move this whole process forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got one more thing there, and I think Matt Sackett has that information on 219.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll let Matt Sackett be the only thing between us and lunch. So go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Chairman, Vice Chairman, members of the committee, Matt Sack with the Treasurer's Office, and I'm keeping you from lunch, so I'll keep this 219 update quick. I think Ms. Scott did a great job explaining what 219, which was basically just change the AFC membership a little bit. Jumping to where we're at, the Treasurer's Office has reached out and solicited interested candidates from current IFC members if they knew anyone that would be interested, and a variety of other avenues to try and get great quality candidates for the IFC. The bill now adds 2 more appointed members from the selection panel, which would have 6 appointed members, and then the treasurer is the 7th voting member, as you guys could see in the bill. So we reached out through IFC and a number of other avenues to get candidates. As of early last week, we had 3 candidates express interest. In addition, a number of IFC members have expressed interest in diversifying the membership of the IFC committee. In particular, we used IFC to reach out to a number of female-oriented financial groups to see if there was any interest. And I'm happy to say that we have 2 very qualified candidates from that area and from that outreach, and possibly potentially several more. So we're looking at, and I actually got a call from another previous candidate just during our break. So we're looking at probably 4, maybe 5. So I feel like this is a bit of a tightrope. We want to, take the time to get great quality candidates and have enough candidates for the selection panel to talk to. Generally, we give them time to reach out to, all the candidates and talk to them and kind of feel out their qualifications and what they would bring to the IFC. But we also want to get these 2 positions filled, as soon as we can. So walking a bit of a tightrope, but we do have 4, probably 5 candidates now that so we're in the process, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for that report, Matt. We appreciate it. We have every confidence in you and the treasurer to do that. And our only advice is just don't screw it up. So anyway, get us good candidates. Thank you. Anything else for us on the subject matter for this particular topic? Any other questions? Go ahead, Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I just like to say that it's been a pleasure being in front of the committee today, and that as we're going through this process, we've got 2 members who are liaisons that they can communicate with you, but you guys are always welcome to communicate with me or my staff, at an ad hoc basis, anytime that you want to reach out and just kind of discuss what's going on at the treasurer's office, or what do you think should be going on at the treasurer's office. So we're open here. The profit center concept, I thought that it would really be nice if we could get revenue, liquor, even the Secretary of State's office that makes 40, 50 million bucks or more a year. There's a lot of them out there, and kind of look at some way to get some flexibility, WRS, and flexibility in a separate budget item that would be kind of like a spillover fund or whatever. So if any of them had really a need for upgrading something to actually, make more money, because sometimes you have to spend money to make money. Government doesn't really look at it like that. But if you had a separate fund that would allow for those profit centers to access that, when they needed to put on that new computer system or that extra person to make sure that all the taxes were paid. And I know that one of the things that Patrick talked about, I'll put on my WRS hat here for a little while because I sit on that board also, is that he talked about our Aladdin risk system. Well, WRS has been trying to put on a risk system of late. And one of the things they found out was that to really do it and do it right is that you're going to have to have a dedicated analyst to actually implement it. Now, we're lucky in our office we have that, but WRS, because they felt that they got a position last year, they didn't really want to ask for a position this year. And now they're going to be flying blind in one of the times when that one, the risk is probably one of the highest out there, with the PE ratios and everything else that's out there. And they necessarily don't have the people to actually implement it. And this is where we're going to have to change our mentality and look at these profit centers as profit centers and figure out some way to be flexible with them so they can get the people and they don't have to fear coming in front of you guys at JEC. So they can actually say, look, this is something that we really need. And we need to be able to have some flexible area in the budget to access what they need on a timely basis, maybe even in between the legislative sessions. So that's just looking at changing your mind from being a cost center to a profit center. And that is, I know, hard to do, but hopefully it won't cost the WRS some money in the situation, not having a good risk system like we're implementing. So with that, I don't have to talk about WRS, but I thought you might.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, was that a paid political announcement or an unpaid political announcement? It was just
Unpaid,
a PSA.
Totally unpaid.
And
So
it's too bad we don't have YouTube from you being on JAC about 10 years ago. And it's just compare and contrast your comments then versus now.
I was pretty damn tough when I was on JAC, but I think when it came to WRS, I think I found out that, my gosh, you have to, if they do their job right, there's a lot less money we have to appropriate.
Yeah,
Right, guys?
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Why don't we go ahead? Why don't we go ahead and adjourn take our lunch break from, I've got essentially 12:30 till 1:30. Be back at 1:30.